I drove 12 hours to my sanctuary only to find my key refused to turn. The solid oak walls I built with my own hands were gone covered in cheap, tacky paper. But the real horror wasn't the renovation. It was what I found on the hidden server in the basement. My own daughter and her husband holding a sledgehammer laughing as they destroyed my life. And the worst part, they were holding my death certificate. Before I unleash the hell I rained down on them, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who built the roof over their head. My name is Desmond Collier. I am 68 years old. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer calculating loads, identifying stress points, and ensuring things did not collapse under pressure. I built my vacation home on the edge of Lake Tahoe with that same precision. It was not just a house. It was a vault. It was the place where my wife Esther and I planned to spend our final years before cancer took her from me 3 years ago. Since then, the house had been my retreat, a place of silence and memory. I had been gone for a year backpacking through the Andes, seeking a solitude that grief had not yet granted me. I returned with a beard full of gray, a truck covered in mud, and a heart ready to rest. I pulled my Ford F-150 into the driveway and killed the engine. The silence of the forest should have welcomed me. Instead, I felt an immediate prickling wrongness. The grass. I keep my property wild, a blend of fescue and native clover that requires no maintenance. What I saw before me was a putting green. The grass was shaved down to the soil, chemical green, artificial, and manicured to within an inch of its life. It looked like a golf course in a gated community, not a mountain retreat. I stepped out of the truck, my boots crunching on gravel that was too clean. I looked at the perimeter fence. I had milled those white oak planks myself, staining them dark to blend with the tree line. Now they were painted a blinding glossy white. It looked like a cheap plastic picket fence from a television commercial. I walked to the front door, the heavy iron key in my hand. I reached for the lock, but there was no keyhole. My solid brass deadbolt, a mechanism that could withstand a battering ram, was gone. In its place sat a sleek black plastic panel with a digital keypad and a biometric scanner. It blinked with a blue, arrogant light. I stood there, the master of my own domain, locked out by a piece of technology that cost less than my boots. I did not knock. I did not call out. I am an engineer. When a system fails, I do not argue with it. I bypass it. I walked around to the detached garage. The keypad there was also new, but the perpetrators were lazy. They had neglected the side maintenance panel. I pulled a multi-tool from my belt, unscrewed the 4 retention bolts, and exposed the wiring. It took me 12 seconds to bridge the solenoid and trigger the emergency release. The garage door groaned and rolled up. My workshop was untouched, likely because whoever had invaded my home did not know how to use a table saw without losing a finger. I moved to the connecting door that led into the main house. It was locked from the inside. I used a thin steel shim to slide the latch. It clicked. I was in. The smell hit me first. It was not the scent of cedar and old books that defined my home. It was a cloud of aggressive, expensive cologne, sandalwood, and desperation. It was the smell of Blake, my son-in-law. Blake is a man who calls himself a real estate entrepreneur, but has never owned a piece of property he did not inherit or marry into. He drives leased cars, wears watches he cannot afford, and treats silence as an enemy. If his scent was here, my daughter Tasha was here. And if they were here changing my locks, something was fundamentally wrong. I stepped into the living room and stopped dead. My bag slid from my shoulder and hit the floor with a heavy thud. The breath left my lungs. The west wall. The entire west wall of the living room was gone. I do not mean the structure was gone, I mean the soul was gone. When I built this house, I selected a single massive white oak tree that had fallen during a storm. I milled it, planed it, and paneled that wall with my own hands. It was the heart of the house. On the far right corner of that paneling, Esther and I had carved Tasha's height every birthday from age 3 to age 18. The wood held the history of my family. Now it was covered. A thick textured wallpaper with a gold and velvet damask pattern choked the room. It was gaudy. It was loud. It was the kind of aesthetic chosen by people who confuse price tags with taste. I walked to the wall, my hand trembling slightly. I reached out and touched the paper. It was thick, vinyl-based. I needed to know if the wood was still underneath. If they had just covered it, I could salvage it. I pulled my pocket knife, flicked the blade, and sliced a 6-inch gash into the gold pattern. I peeled it back. White dust crumbled onto my fingers. Drywall. They had not covered the oak. They had removed it. They had ripped out the solid wood paneling, the growth charts, the memory of my wife, and replaced it with cheap gypsum board and glue. A coldness settled in my stomach, heavier than anger. This was not a renovation. This was an erasure. You do not renovate a man's house while he is on vacation. You do not erase his history unless you believe he is never coming back. I looked around the rest of the room. My leather armchair was gone, replaced by a white sectional sofa that looked uncomfortable and impractical. The landscape paintings Esther had collected were gone, replaced by generic abstract prints that matched the rugs. The house had been staged. I recognized the look. I had seen it in the brochures Blake left lying around at family dinners. This house was not being lived in. It was being prepared for sale. I did not scream. I did not pick up the phone to call Tasha. I needed information. I needed to know how long this had been happening and how deep the rot went. I turned and walked to the kitchen. The island was covered in mail. I flipped through it, bills, catalogs, and a large envelope from a title company addressed to the estate of Desmond Collier. The estate. That word implies death. I moved to the hallway. At the end of the hall, behind a built-in wine rack that looked permanently fixed, was a door. Most people, including my daughter, thought it was just a mechanical chase for the HVAC system. It was not. I pushed a hidden release mechanism under the third shelf. The rack swung outward on silent, heavy-duty hinges. I stepped into the cool, windowless room that served as the brain of the house. This was my server room. I had wired the house with a closed-circuit security system years ago, independent of the internet, powered by a dedicated solar array and battery bank. It did not send alerts to my phone. It simply recorded loop after loop, storing terabytes of data on hard drives stacked in a ventilated rack. If they had cut the internet, they would think the cameras were dead. They were wrong. I sat in the single ergonomic chair in front of the monitors. The system hummed to life. I typed in my encryption key. The screens flickered on. The live feed showed the empty, bastardized living room I had just left. I navigated the timeline. I scrolled back. 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month. I watched the house transform in reverse. The white furniture disappeared. The ugly wallpaper vanished. And then I found the day. 3 months ago. I pressed play. The timestamp read October 14th, 00 p.m. The footage was crisp, 4K resolution. Blake walked into the frame. He was wearing a designer tracksuit and holding a 10-pound sledgehammer. He looked out of place, a soft man holding a hard tool. Tasha followed him. She was holding a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. She looked radiant. She looked happy. "Are you sure we should do this?" Blake asked on the recording. The audio was crystal clear. Tasha laughed. It was a sound I used to love. Now it sounded like breaking glass. "Do it, babe. Destroy it. I always hated this gloomy old wood. It smells like old people." Blake swung the hammer. The impact echoed through the speakers. He hit the wall right where Tasha's height markings were. The wood splintered. He hit it again and again. He wasn't just demolishing a wall, he was enjoying the violence of it. He was sweating, his face twisted in a grin of exertion and glee. "Harder," Tasha cheered, sipping her champagne. "Tear it all down. The contractor says the open concept will add 50 grand to the asking price." Blake stopped leaning on the hammer, panting. "What about the old man? What if the search and rescue teams find something?" Tasha walked over to him. She placed a hand on his chest. "They won't find him, Blake. He's been gone 2 months. The avalanche report was clear. He's buried under 10 feet of snow in Chile. He is dead. We are rich. Now finish the wall so we can find the safe." I sat in the dark server room, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face. My hands were perfectly still. They believed I was dead. They had declared me dead. And because they thought I was a corpse frozen in the Andes, they felt safe enough to smash my life to pieces with a sledgehammer. "The safe," Blake said on screen. "You think the bonds are really in there?" "He never trusted banks," Tasha replied. "He told Mom once that the real retirement fund was built into the foundation. It's behind this wall, Blake. It has to be. Smash it." I paused the video. I looked at the frozen image of my daughter's face. There was no grief there. There was only greed. Pure, distilled greed. I leaned back in the chair. The pain was there, a sharp physical ache in the center of my chest, but I pushed it down. I compacted it just as I would compact soil before laying a foundation. I replaced the pain with cold, hard logic. They wanted to sell my house. They wanted the contents of the safe. They thought I was a ghost. I looked at the date on the screen again. 3 months. They had been living in my house, erasing my existence and hunting for my fortune for 90 days. I checked the current system status. The motion sensors at the front gate triggered. A notification flashed on the side monitor. Vehicle detected, Range Rover black, license plate Lux Life. Blake's car. I switched to the driveway camera. The black SUV rolled up the long drive, kicking up dust on the gravel. It parked next to my truck. I watched Blake step out. He stopped when he saw my Ford. He stared at it. He walked around it. He touched the hood. It was still warm. He pulled his phone out and dialed a number. On the screen inside the SUV, I saw Tasha pick up her phone. "Babe," Blake said, his voice tinny through the exterior microphone I had installed near the garage. "There's a truck here. It looks like Desmond's truck." "That's impossible." Tasha's voice came through the car's Bluetooth system, audible because Blake had left the door open. "He's dead. We have the certificate." "I'm looking at it, Tasha. It's his truck. It's warm." "Call the police," Tasha screamed. "Tell them a squatter is on the property. I'm 10 minutes behind you." I watched Blake hang up. He looked at the house. He looked terrified. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a small silver pistol. He didn't know how to hold it. His finger was on the trigger. I smiled in the darkness of the server room. They wanted a ghost. They were about to get one. I stood up and locked the server room door from the inside. Then I initiated the lockdown protocol on my keyboard, a command I had written years ago for fire protection. Heavy steel shutters began to roll down over every window in the house. The sound was a low, mechanical rumble that shook the floorboards. On the monitor, I saw Blake jump back as the house sealed itself up like a fortress. He was locked out. I was locked in. And I had control of everything: the lights, the water, the temperature, and the sound system. My daughter was 10 minutes away. My son-in-law was armed and panicked outside. And I was sitting on top of the secrets they were so desperate to find. They wanted the safe. They were going to have to go through me. And I was not the benevolent father they remembered. I was the engineer who knew exactly where the structural weaknesses were. And I was ready to bring the whole thing down on their heads. I sat in the darkness of the server room and stared at the frozen image on the screen. The timestamp was from 4 weeks ago. Tasha and Blake were sitting at my dining table eating pizza out of a cardboard box. Grease stains marked the wood I had sanded by hand. But I was not looking at the food. I was looking at the document Tasha held in her manicured hand. I typed a command into the console to enhance the resolution. The image sharpened. It was a standard government form with a heavy red stamp at the bottom. State of California. Certificate of death. Name of deceased Desmond Collier. Date of death November 14th. Cause of death: blunt force trauma secondary to accidental fall. Location Andes Mountains, Chile. I leaned back in the ergonomic chair and felt the blood drain from my face. I was looking at my own death warrant. It was a lie, but it was a calculated lie. I had indeed been in the Andes. I had been trekking a remote pass when a blizzard hit. I lost satellite signal for 8 weeks. I was cold and I was hungry, but I was never lost. I am an engineer. I know how to survive. When I walked out of the mountains and into a small village in Santiago, the first thing I did was find an internet cafe. I emailed Tasha. I told her I was alive. I told her I was coming home. She never replied. I assumed the internet connection was faulty or she was busy. I was wrong. She had received that email. She had deleted it. She had blocked my IP address. She chose to let the world believe I was dead because a dead father was worth more to her than a living one. She used the window of my silence to finalize the paperwork. She declared me dead in absentia. She murdered me with a pen and a notary stamp. I watched the screen as Blake raised a slice of pizza in a toast. He said something that the microphone picked up clearly. To the old man. May he rot in a ravine so we can live in a castle. Tasha laughed. She clinked her beer bottle against his. She looked at the death certificate with a look of pure adoration. She loved that piece of paper more than she had ever loved me. I needed to see the physical damage. I unlocked the server room door and moved silently back into the living room. The silence of the house felt heavy now. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene. I walked to the wall where I had peeled back the wallpaper. I needed to know why they had covered it. I knew Tasha hated the wood, but Blake was lazy. He would not have repapered a wall just for aesthetics. There had to be a structural reason. I used my knife to slash a larger section of the gold vinyl. I ripped it down in a long strip. The drywall underneath was new, but it was patched poorly. I kicked the drywall. My boot went through the cheap gypsum. I tore the hole wider with my hands. Behind the drywall was the steel face of the wall safe I had installed 10 years ago. I stared at the safe, and a cold smile touched my lips. It looked like it had been through a war. The dial was melted into a lump of slag. There were deep, angry gouges around the hinges where someone had taken a high-speed angle grinder to the metal. There were scorch marks from an oxyacetylene torch that had blackened the surrounding studs. They had tried everything. They had tried to burn it. They had tried to cut it. They had probably spent days sweating and cursing in front of this steel box. They failed. They failed because they saw a safe and thought it was just a metal box. They did not know I had reinforced the door with a layer of manganese steel specifically designed to shatter drill bits. They did not know the locking mechanism had a glass relocker plate that would permanently seize the bolts if it detected heat or impact. They were amateurs trying to break into a fortress designed by a master builder. Inside that safe sat $3 million in bearer bonds. I bought them slowly over 30 years. I do not trust digital banks. I do not trust numbers on a screen that can be wiped out by a hacker or a market crash. I trust paper. I trust steel. Those bonds were my retirement. They were the legacy I had planned to leave Tasha before she decided to erase me. She knew the bonds were there. She used to watch me file them away when she was a teenager. She knew the wealth existed, but she did not know the combination. Blake likely thought the combination was a birthday or an anniversary. He is a simple man with a simple mind. He does not understand that an engineer does not use sentimental numbers for security. The combination was a 6-number sequence derived from the structural load limit of the Golden Gate Bridge multiplied by the tensile strength of A36 steel. It was a number that existed only in my head and in the physics textbooks I kept in my library. Without that math, the safe was a tomb. They had realized they could not open it. They could not blow it up without destroying the house. So they did the only thing their shallow minds could conceive. They covered up their failure. They put up cheap drywall and ugly wallpaper to hide the scarred steel. They decided to sell the house with the treasure locked inside, likely planning to come back for it later. Or perhaps they just needed the money from the house sale so desperately they were willing to abandon the bonds. A chime echoed through the house. It was a soft digital tone from the security panel in the hallway. Exterior motion detected. Driveway. I ran back to the server room and locked the door. I sat before the monitors and switched the feed to the live exterior cameras. A white Lexus SUV was pulling up the gravel drive. It parked right next to my truck. The driver door opened. A man stepped out. I recognized him instantly. Miller. Miller was a real estate agent who operated on the fringes of the law. He had lost his license twice for ethics violations and somehow always managed to get it reinstated. He wore a suit that was too shiny and a smile that looked like a bear trap. He walked around my truck. He frowned. He touched the hood. He knew someone was here. The passenger doors opened. A young couple stepped out. I zoomed in on their faces. They looked young, maybe late 20s. The man wore a flannel shirt and jeans. The woman wore a sundress. They held hands. They looked at the house with wide, hopeful eyes. They saw a dream. They saw a future. I looked at the reservation tag hanging from the rearview mirror of the Lexus. Ryan and Emily. I turned up the volume on the exterior microphones. The audio feed crackled and then cleared. "I don't know whose truck that is," Miller said, waving his hand dismissively. "Probably a contractor finishing up some punch list items. Don't worry about it, the house is vacant." Ryan looked at the house. "It is beautiful," he said. "But the price, Miller. It seems too good to be true." Miller laughed. It was a wet, unpleasant sound. "Look, I will be level with you. The owner, Desmond Collier, died in a tragic accident overseas. He didn't leave a will. He died intestate. His daughter Tasha just wants to liquidate the assets. She is too heartbroken to deal with the property management. She wants a quick sale. Cash only." Emily squeezed Ryan's hand. "That is so sad," she said. "It is a tragedy," Miller agreed, putting on a mask of solemnity. "But it is your opportunity. Because she wants a quick close, she is offering the property at 60% of market value. But you have to sign today, and you have to put down a non-refundable cash deposit." I sat in the dark and listened to him sell my life. He was using my death, my fake death, as a sales tactic. He was preying on these two young people. He was going to take their money, give them a deed that wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, and disappear. Tasha and Blake were not just selling a house. They were running a title fraud scam. Ryan looked at Emily. "We have the cash from the settlement," he whispered. "We could do it." Emily nodded. She looked at the lake visible through the trees. "It is perfect, Ryan. It is everything we wanted." Miller clapped his hands together. "Great, let's go inside. I have the keys." He walked toward the front door. I checked the system. The biometric lock on the front door was still active. Miller punched in a code. The lock chirped and disengaged. They had given him a master code. I was trapped. I was locked in the server room. If I went out there now, I would have to confront 3 people. Miller would panic. The kids would be confused. And Tasha and Blake would be alerted immediately. If Miller saw me, he would call Blake. Blake was armed. I saw the gun in the glove box on the recording. I needed to be smart. I needed to control the environment. I looked at the smart home control panel on my desk. I had wired every system in the house to this hub. Lights, water, heating, cooling, locks, shutters. Miller opened the front door and ushered Ryan and Emily inside. "Welcome home, folks," Miller said. "Look at that wallpaper. Very modern, very chic." I watched them walk into the living room on the monitor. They were standing 10 feet away from me, separated only by the false wall of the wine rack. I could hear their footsteps through the floorboards. "I am not dead," I whispered to the screen, "and this house is not for sale." I watched Emily run her hand over the gold wallpaper. She didn't know she was touching the scene of a crime. She didn't know she was standing next to $3 million, and she didn't know that the dead man was watching her from behind the wall holding a digital detonator. Miller pulled a contract out of his briefcase. He placed it on the kitchen island. "Standard agreement," he said. "Sign here and the keys are yours." Ryan reached for his back pocket. He pulled out a thick white envelope. I knew what was inside. Cash. A lot of cash. I could stop this. I could burst out and end the charade. But then Tasha and Blake would know I was here. They would run. They would disappear with the money they had already stolen. I needed them here. I needed them to come to me. I looked at the young couple. I looked at the envelope. I made a decision. I would not stop the sale. I would let it happen. But I would not let Miller leave with that money. And I would not let this couple leave my house. They were about to become guests in a house of horrors. I reached for the climate control slider on my screen. I dropped the temperature setting for the main floor to 50 degrees. I turned the water heater off. I set the lighting system to random pulse mode. If they wanted the house, they could have it. But they were going to have to survive it first. I sat in the airless dark of the server room and watched the robbery unfold in high definition. The audio feed from the kitchen was so sensitive I could hear the fabric of Miller's cheap suit rustle as he leaned over my island. He was lying. I knew the cadence of a structural failure before it happened, and this man's voice was buckling under the weight of his own deceit. Ryan was the problem. He was young, but he had the eyes of a man who measured twice before he cut. He was reading the single-page contract Miller had placed on the granite countertop. He frowned. He tapped the paper with a calloused finger. "Mr. Miller, this document says the title transfer is pending probate court approval," Ryan said. His voice was steady but tight. "That means the deed isn't clear. If we hand over the cash today, we don't actually own the house. We just own a promise." Miller laughed. It was a dismissive sound designed to make Ryan feel small. "You are overthinking it, son. This is a standard holdover agreement. The owner died intestate. That means no will. The state of California moves slow, but the daughter Tasha has full executorship. She is just doing you a favor by letting you take possession early." Ryan looked at Emily. She was standing by the sink looking out at the lake. The sunlight hit her face and I saw the desperation there. She did not care about probate courts or title insurance. She saw a home. She saw a future. Miller saw that too. He pivoted away from Ryan and aimed his weaponized charm at her. "Emily, imagine waking up to this view every morning," Miller said softly. "Tasha has 2 other cash offers on the table, both from investors who want to bulldoze it and build condos. She wants to sell to a family. She wants to honor her father's memory. But she needs the liquidity today to pay off the estate taxes. If you walk away now, the condo developers get it by noon." I gripped the arms of my chair. My knuckles turned white. "Honor my memory. My daughter had erased my memory. She had destroyed my walls. And now she was using a fictional version of me, a benevolent ghost, to scam these kids. Emily turned to Ryan. Her eyes were wet. Ryan, please. We have been looking for 2 years. We will never find another place like this. The baby needs a yard. The baby. I froze. Emily placed a hand on her stomach. It was a subtle gesture, but I recognized it. I remembered Esther doing the same thing 40 years ago when she was carrying Tasha. These people were starting a family, and Miller was about to steal their foundation. Ryan sighed. He looked at his wife. He looked at the house. He folded the contract. Okay, he said. Okay. But I want a notarized receipt, and I want the keys in my hand before you leave. Miller grinned. His teeth looked like porcelain veneers paid for with other people's misery. You got it. Let's do business. Ryan reached into his backpack. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was heavy. It was dense. I knew exactly what $50,000 in used hundreds looked like. I had withdrawn similar amounts to pay contractors for the foundation pour of this very house. That envelope contained sweat. It contained overtime shifts. It contained missed vacations and cheap dinners. It was their life. Miller's eyes widened. A small tick started under his left eye. He reached out. His hand was shaking slightly. Ryan held onto the envelope for a second too long. He was hesitant. His gut was screaming at him. I wanted to shout through the speakers. I wanted to trigger the alarm. I wanted to tell him to run. But I did not. If I stopped them now, Miller would leave. He would call Tasha. They would know I was alive. They would vanish into the wind, and I would never get the justice I needed. I needed Tasha and Blake here. I needed them to put their hands on that money so I could nail them to the wall. Ryan let go. Miller snatched the envelope. He didn't even count it. He just weighed it in his hand like a butcher weighing a cut of meat. He shoved it into his briefcase and snapped the latches shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. Here you go, Miller said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. It was a shiny brass quickset key. It was worthless. I had installed biometric locks on the exterior doors years ago. The physical cylinders were just backups, and I had rekeyed them myself before I left for Chile. That key would not open anything in this house. He also handed them a slip of paper. Here is the master code for the front door, he said. 12345. Don't lose it. I shook my head in the dark. 12345. The laziness of these criminals was insulting. Welcome home, Miller said. He didn't shake hands. He turned and walked out the front door faster than a man should walk in his own house. He was fleeing the scene of a crime. I watched on the exterior cameras as Miller jumped into his Lexus. He peeled out of the driveway, throwing gravel. He was gone. The silence returned to the house. But it was different now. It was occupied. Ryan and Emily stood in the kitchen. They looked around. They looked terrified. The adrenaline of the purchase was fading, and the reality of what they had just done was settling in. We did it, Emily whispered. She sounded unsure. We just spent every dime we have, Ryan said. His voice was flat. If this goes wrong, if this guy was lying. Don't think like that, Emily said. She walked over and hugged him. It's ours. We own it. Let's bring the bags in. I watched them walk out to their car. They began unloading suitcases, boxes, a crib, a disassembled crib. They were moving in. They weren't just staying for an hour to measure for curtains. They were staying for the night. Maybe forever. I was trapped. I looked at the heavy steel door of the server room. It was the only exit. It opened directly into the hallway. If I opened it, they would hear it. The hinges were well oiled, but the latch was mechanical and loud. Even if I managed to get out of the room, I would have to walk down the hall past the kitchen and out the back door. The floorboards in the hallway squeaked. I knew exactly which ones. The third board from the linen closet. The fifth board near the master bedroom. I could not cross that floor without announcing my presence. I checked the time. It was 4:00 p.m. The sun was starting to dip behind the pines. The temperature would drop soon. I had options. Option A was to wait until they fell asleep and try to sneak out. But Ryan looked like a light sleeper. He was stressed. He would be listening to every creak of the house settling. If he caught me lurking in the hallway, he would attack. He was defending his pregnant wife and his investment. He would use that baseball bat or maybe something worse. I am 68. I am strong, but I am not looking for a fistfight with a 20-something desperate man. Option B was to reveal myself now. Walk out, show my ID, tell them the truth. I am Desmond. I am not dead. You have been scammed. I played that scenario out in my head. Emily would scream. Ryan would likely attack first and ask questions later. Even if I calmed them down, what then? They would want their money back. Miller was gone. Tasha and Blake had the cash or would have it soon. If I told them the truth, they would go to the police. The police would come. They would take a report. Miller would deny everything. Tasha would claim she thought I was dead. It would become a civil matter, a lawsuit. It would take years. And in the meantime, Tasha and Blake would disappear. No, I needed immediate leverage. I needed Tasha and Blake to come back to the house. I needed them to walk into a trap they couldn't lawyer their way out of. I looked at Ryan and Emily on the monitor. They were in the living room now, unpacking boxes. Ryan was hanging a picture on the wall. He was hammering a nail into the drywall right next to where the safe was hidden. He didn't know he was inches away from the reason Miller had sold him the house so cheap. They were victims. But in my world, victims are just variables in an equation. I could not save them by being nice. I could only save them by being ruthless. I needed an army. I didn't have one. I had a young couple who had just been robbed. They were angry. They were desperate. They were perfect. I decided to weaponize them. I would not drive them out. I would not scare them away. I would use the house to manipulate them. I would force them to find the safe. I would force them to realize they had been scammed. And then I would offer them a deal they couldn't refuse. I turned back to the smart home console. I accessed the environmental controls. Step 1 was to make them uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people make rash decisions. Uncomfortable people look for answers. I lowered the thermostat to 55 degrees. I disabled the hot water recirculation pump. The water in the pipes would turn ice cold in 20 minutes. Then I accessed the lighting grid. I programmed a subroutine. Every time the motion sensor in the kitchen triggered, the lights in the hallway would flicker, just once. A subtle subliminal irritation. I watched Ryan on the screen. He shivered. He looked at the thermostat on the wall. "Honey, is it cold in here?" he asked. "It's freezing," Emily said, rubbing her arms. "The heat must be off." Ryan walked to the thermostat. He tapped the screen. "It says it's set to 70, but the ambient temp is dropping. Maybe the furnace needs to cycle." He walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. He turned on the tap. I watched him wait for hot water. He waited and waited. He stuck his finger under the stream and pulled it back. "Ice cold," he muttered. "Great. First day and the water heater is busted." He pulled his phone out. I zoomed in. He was calling Miller. I tapped into the phone line. I had tapped the landline years ago, but I also had a signal booster in the attic that acted as a femtocell. All cellular traffic from the house routed through my server. I could hear both sides of the call. Voicemail. Of course. Miller was probably halfway to the bank to launder that cash. Ryan slammed the phone down on the counter. He didn't answer. He walked back into the living room. He looked at the wall with the gold wallpaper. He looked frustrated. He needed to vent. He raised his fist and punched the wall. It was a solid strike born of $50,000 worth of anxiety. His fist went through the cheap drywall. He pulled his hand back. White dust fell to the floor. He looked at the hole he had made. He frowned. He leaned in closer. "Emily," he said, his voice shaking. "Emily, come look at this." Emily walked over. "What is it?" Ryan reached into the hole and peeled back a larger piece of the wallpaper. He exposed the scorched steel of the safe door. He ran his finger over the melt marks from the torch. "There is a safe here," Ryan said. "A massive safe. And someone tried to break into it. Recently." He looked at the scorch marks on the studs. The wood was still smelling of carbon. "This wasn't an accident," he whispered. "Miller lied. Someone was tearing this house apart." He turned to Emily. His face was pale. "We need to get our money back. Now." I sat back in my chair. The bait was taken. Now I just needed to reel them in. I reached for the door handle of the server room. It was time to introduce myself, not as the owner, but as the solution. I stood in the server room and conducted the house like a maestro of misery. On the thermal monitor, I watched Ryan step into the master shower. He turned the handle to the red dot, expecting the luxury he had paid for. I typed a single command line into the HVAC interface. Override water heater, bypass mixing valve, source lake intake. The water temperature plummeted from 110 degrees to 45 degrees in 3 seconds. Ryan screamed. It was a high, sharp sound of pure shock. He scrambled out of the glass enclosure, slipping on the wet tile and crashing into the vanity. In the kitchen, Emily was trying to boil water on the induction cooktop. She looked nervous, jumping at the settling noises of the house. I decided to speak to her, not with audio but with lumens. I accessed the kitchen lighting grid and wrote a script. High-intensity strobe, short, short, long. I tapped out the message in Morse code, GETOUT. The recessed LEDs above her head flashed violently, blindingly. It was aggressive. Emily dropped the kettle water, splashing across my hardwood floor. She screamed for Ryan. They collided in the hallway. Ryan was shivering, wrapped in a towel, his lips turning blue. Emily was pale, clutching a steak knife she had grabbed from the block. "This house is broken," Ryan chattered. "The water is ice, the lights are possessed. It feels like someone is watching us," Emily whispered, her eyes darting to the ceiling. I did not let up. I dropped the ambient temperature of the hallway another 10 degrees and locked the thermostat interface. They were freezing. They were terrified. They were exactly where I needed them to be. While they huddled in the living room trying to get a cell signal to call the useless real estate agent, I turned my attention to the data logs. My server captured everything. Every packet of data that moved through my Wi-Fi network was archived. Blake had spent 3 months here, and he had been careless. I pulled up his user profile from the network history. Blake Laptop Pro. I accessed the keylogger file I had installed on the router years ago to monitor bandwidth usage. It had captured every keystroke he made. I found his email password in seconds. I logged into his account. The inbox was a disaster of overdue bills and gambling notifications. But one email stood out. It was in the trash folder dated 2 days ago. The subject line was simply, "Final Notice." The sender was V. Calloway. I opened it. The text was short and brutal. "You have 48 hours, Blake. The principal is 150. The VIG is 50. Total due is 200,000. If you do not have the cash by Sunday noon, do not worry about paying us back. Worry about learning to type with no fingers. We know where your wife is. We know where the lake house is. Sell it. Burn it. We do not care. Just pay us." I leaned back in my chair. The picture was complete. Blake was not just greedy. He was a dead man walking. He had gambled away money he didn't have, and now the sharks were circling. That explained the rush to sell. That explained the sledgehammer attacking the walls. He was desperate to find the bonds in the safe to pay off the debt. When he couldn't open the safe, he pivoted to scamming these kids for $50,000 just to buy himself a few more days of breathing room. I checked the time. It was Saturday evening. The deadline was tomorrow noon. Blake was out of options. That made him dangerous, but it also made him predictable. I switched back to the live feed. Ryan was dressed now in a thick sweater, pacing the living room. He looked furious. The cold and the flickering lights had stripped away the romance of the new house. He saw it for what it was, a trap. "No signal," he yelled, throwing his phone onto the couch. I had activated the signal jammer in the attic. "I can't get a single bar. We have to leave," Emily said, her voice trembling. "We can go to a hotel." "No," Ryan said, his jaw set. "We put $50,000 cash into this place. If we leave, we abandon possession. Miller could change the locks. We stay. We hold our ground. But I am going to find out what is wrong with this wiring." He walked over to the wall with the gold wallpaper. He was looking for a fuse box, a logical explanation for the chaos. He wouldn't find one. He tapped on the wall. It sounded hollow. He tapped again, harder. "This drywall is garbage," he muttered. "It feels thin." He was frustrated. He was cold. He needed to hit something. He pulled his fist back and punched the wall. It was a solid strike born of anxiety and buyer's remorse. His fist went straight through the cheap paper and gypsum. He pulled his hand back, shaking white dust off his knuckles. He looked at the hole. He froze. He didn't see wooden studs. He didn't see insulation. He saw dark, scorched metal. "Emily, come here," he said, his voice low. Ryan reached into the hole. He grabbed the edge of the wallpaper and ripped it downward. A large strip of gold vinyl peeled away. The safe was exposed. It sat there like a black iron wound, the burn marks from the oxyacetylene torch stark against the white dust. The drill holes in the manganese plate looked like bullet wounds. "This isn't a fuse box," Ryan whispered. "It's a safe. A massive one." He ran his finger over the melted dial. "Someone tried to break into this, recently. Look at the burns." He turned to Emily, his eyes wide with realization. Miller lied. This wasn't a renovation. It was a cover-up. They were hiding this because they couldn't open it. "Why would they hide a safe?" Emily asked. "Because whatever is inside is worth more than the house," Ryan said, "and they are coming back for it." I stood up in the server room. Ryan had found the smoking gun. Now I just needed to hand him the bullets. I reached for the handle of the steel door. It was time to introduce myself. The steel latch of the server room door clicked loudly in the silence of the hallway. It was the sound of a gun hammer being cocked. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped out from behind the wine rack. The sudden movement caught Ryan's eye. He spun around his face, a mask of primal fear. He saw a stranger emerging from a wall that shouldn't have been there. He saw a man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much winter. He reacted on instinct. Ryan grabbed a heavy aluminum baseball bat that was leaning against a pile of moving boxes. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't freeze. He swung. It was a good swing, flat and hard, aimed directly at my ribs. He was protecting his pregnant wife and his territory. I respected that. But I had spent 3 years in the engineering corps and 40 years on construction sites where steel beams swung like pendulums. I knew about force vectors and pivot points. I stepped inside the arc of his swing. I moved into his personal space before the bat could generate full velocity. My left hand shot out and clamped onto his right wrist. I pressed my thumb into the ulnar nerve and twisted his forearm outward. It was a simple mechanical leverage. His grip failed instantly. The bat clattered to the hardwood floor. I swept his leg with my boot and drove him backward into the wall. I pinned him there with my forearm against his chest. I did not strike him. I just immobilized him. "Who are you?" Ryan screamed, struggling against my weight. "I am the man who built this wall," I said calmly. "And I am the man whose name is on the deed you think you own." I reached into my back pocket with my free hand and pulled out my passport. I flipped it open and held it up to his face. "Read it." Ryan stopped struggling. His eyes darted from my face to the photo. Desmond Collier, date of birth 1956. The photo was younger. The beard was shorter, but the eyes were the same. "You are dead," Ryan whispered. "Miller said you died in Chile. Miller is a liar and a thief," I said. I released him and stepped back. I picked up the baseball bat and leaned it against the wall. "I am very much alive, but my bank account is dead. And so is your $50,000. Emily was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She was shaking. She looked at me and then at Ryan. She looked at the passport on the floor. The reality of the situation hit her like a physical blow. Her legs gave out. She slid down the doorframe and buried her face in her hands. A sound torn from her throat echoed through the cold house. It was the sound of a dream dying. "We lost everything," she sobbed. "Every cent. We borrowed from my parents. We sold the car. It is all gone." Ryan looked at her. The fight drained out of him. He looked at me with the eyes of a defeated man. "You are going to kick us out," he said. "We are trespassing." I looked at them. They were young. They were foolish. But they were not my enemy. They were collateral damage in a war my daughter had started. I walked over to the kitchen island. I picked up the contract Miller had left. I tore it in half. "I am not going to kick you out," I said. "Not yet. I am going to offer you a job." Ryan frowned. "A job." I walked over to the hole in the wall where the safe was exposed. I ran my hand over the cold steel. "You found the safe, Ryan." "That is good. That safe is the reason you are here. My son-in-law Blake owes $200,000 to people who break legs for a living. He thinks there are $3 million in bonds inside this box. He couldn't open it, so he sold the house to you to get quick cash to pay off his interest. But he is not done. He is coming back. He has to." Emily looked up. Her face was streaked with tears. "Coming back. Why?" "Because $50,000 won't save his life," I said. "It only buys him time. He needs what is in this safe, and I need him to try and take it. I turned to face them. I laid my hands flat on the island. Here is the deal. You have lost $50,000. I have lost my family. I want to catch them. I want to send them to prison for fraud and attempted murder. But I cannot do it alone. If I call the police now, they will run. If I confront them, they will deny it. I need to catch them in the act of breaking and entering. I need to catch them destroying my property. I pointed at Ryan. You are going to call Blake. You are going to tell him you found the safe. You are going to tell him you think there is gold inside. You are going to act greedy. You are going to tell him you can't open it, and you want to cut a deal. Ryan shook his head. He won't believe me. He thinks I am just a dumb buyer. He is desperate, I countered. Desperate men believe anything that offers them a lifeline. You tell him you found the safe behind the wallpaper. You tell him you don't want to report it because you don't want to pay taxes on found treasure. You appeal to his greed. He will understand greed. It is the only language he speaks fluently. And what do we get out of this? Ryan asked. His eyes narrowed. Why should we help you? You are the one who turned off the heat. You are the one who terrified my wife. I nodded. I did. I needed to see what you were made of. And now I know. You have fight in you. If you help me trap them, I will write you a check for $50,000 to reimburse your loss. And I will add another $10,000 for your trouble. Cash. Today. Ryan looked at Emily. $10,000. That was enough to start over. It was enough for a nursery. It was enough to fix the mistake they had made. Emily wiped her face. She stood up. She walked over to Ryan and took his hand. Do it, she said. Get our money back. Ryan took a deep breath. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. It had no signal. I pulled a small remote from my pocket and pressed a button. The signal jammer in the attic powered down. Ryan's phone chimed as bars appeared. I handed him a slip of paper with a number on it. This is Blake's personal cell, not the business line. Put it on speaker. Ryan dialed. The ringtone echoed in the silent kitchen. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Yeah. The voice was rough, distracted. It was Blake. I could hear background noise. A television, probably a sports game. He was trying to act normal while his life burned down. Blake, this is Ryan. I bought the lake house today from Miller. There was a pause. Yeah, Ryan. Congrats. What do you want? I told Miller no refunds. I don't want a refund, Ryan said. His voice was shaky, but it sounded like excitement, not fear. He was a natural. I found something. I was moving furniture and I put a hole in the wall. The west wall. There is a safe back here, Blake. A huge steel safe. The background noise on the other end stopped. Blake had muted the TV. A safe? Blake asked. His voice dropped an octave. What kind of safe? It looks old, Ryan said. I peeled back the paper. It looks like someone tried to burn it open. Listen, Blake, I don't want to call the cops. If there is money in here or gold, I don't want the IRS knowing about it. But I can't open it. I figured since you are the family, you might know the combination. I watched the phone. I could practically hear the gears grinding in Blake's panic-stricken brain. He was thinking about the debt. He was thinking about the threats. And now he was thinking about a stranger holding the key to his salvation. There is nothing in there, Blake said quickly. Just old papers. My father-in-law was a hoarder. Ryan laughed. It was a nervous, greedy laugh. Papers don't need 3 inches of steel, Blake. I tried to drill it. I broke 2 bits. This thing is serious. Look, if you don't want to help, I will just call a locksmith and keep whatever is inside. I just thought maybe we could split it. 50-50. Split it, Blake repeated. He sounded offended. It is my house. It is my house now, Ryan shot back. I have the keys. I have the contract. Possession is 9/10 of the law. You want in or not. I held my breath. This was the tipping point. If Blake was smart, he would hang up. But Blake was not smart. He was drowning. Don't call a locksmith, Blake said. Do not call anyone. I know what is in there. It is family heirlooms. My wife wants them, Great Ryan said. Come get them, but bring a way to open this door, and bring cash if you want to buy me out of my share. I can't come tonight, Blake said. I am 2 hours away. Tomorrow then, Ryan said. Tomorrow night, after dark. I don't want the neighbors seeing us moving gold bars. Fine, Blake said. Tomorrow night, 8:00 p.m. Don't touch anything, Ryan. If you scratch that safe, I will sue you. Ryan hung up. He looked at me. He was sweating. He is coming, Ryan said. I nodded. Of course he is. He thinks he just won the lottery. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark forest. The trap was set. Blake would bring Tasha. They would bring tools. They would break into my home with the intent to loot it, and I would be waiting for them. I turned back to the young couple. "You did good," I said. "Now we prepare." Ryan looked at the hole in the wall. "What is actually in there?" he asked. "Is there really gold?" I smiled, a cold, humorless smile. "No," I said. "There is something much more valuable. There is the truth, and tomorrow night we are going to force them to look at it." I went to the pantry and pulled out a bottle of aged scotch. I poured 3 glasses. I handed one to Ryan and one to Emily. "To alliances," I said, raising my glass. "To getting our money back," Ryan said. We drank. The scotch burned going down. It felt like fuel. I had 24 hours to turn my home into a courtroom, a prison, and a theater. I had work to do. I slipped out of the house through the garage maintenance door while Ryan and Emily kept watch from the living room window. I did not take my truck. Blake knew that vehicle, and I could not risk him spotting it in town. I walked 2 miles through the dense pine forest to the county road and called a ride-share service from a burner phone I kept in my emergency kit. My destination was not the police station. It was the office of Carter Banks. Carter has been my attorney for 20 years. He is a man who wears 3-piece suits in the middle of summer and believes that a contract is only as good as the man who signs it. When I walked past his receptionist, she dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the marble floor. She screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of pure terror. She thought she was seeing a ghost. I ignored her and pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to Carter's private office. Carter was on the phone. He looked up. His face went gray. The phone slid from his hand and hit the desk. "Desmond," he whispered. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I sat in the leather chair opposite him and leaned forward. "I am not dead, Carter," I said, "but someone is trying very hard to make it official." Carter stood up. He walked around the desk and poked me in the shoulder. He needed to verify I was solid matter. When he felt bone and muscle, he let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. "Tasha was here last week," Carter said. "She brought a death certificate." It looked real, Desmond. It had the seal of the U.S. consulate in Chile. "She said you fell during a climb. She was crying. She was wearing black." I nodded. "She is a good actress. I need to see the file, Carter. I need to see what she filed with the court." Carter went to his safe. He pulled out a thick file folder labeled Collier Estate. He handed it to me. I opened it. The first document was the petition for emergency probate. It was a legal request to bypass the standard waiting period for inheritance due to financial hardship. Tasha claimed that without immediate access to my assets, the estate would fall into disrepair. It was a lie. I had prepaid the property taxes and utilities for 5 years. But the document that made my blood boil was the affidavit of intent. It was a document stating that I had verbally promised the lake house to Tasha and Blake. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Desmond Collier. I stared at the ink. It was black ballpoint. I looked up at Carter. "You have known me for 2 decades. Have I ever signed a legal document with a black ballpoint pen?" Carter shook his head. "Never. You use a architectural fountain pen, blue pigment ink, waterproof. You say black ink looks like a photocopy." "Exactly," I said. I tapped the paper. "This is a forgery, and it is a lazy one." Tasha traced it from an old birthday card I sent her. I can see the hesitation marks in the curvature of the C. She stopped twice to check her work. "This is a felony," Carter said quietly. "This is fraud upon the court. If we present this to a judge, she goes to prison." "Not yet," I said. "I want them to hang themselves completely. I want the full scope of the betrayal. Did she access the accounts?" Carter looked uncomfortable. "She tried. The main investment accounts are locked in a trust that requires biometric verification or a physical presence. She couldn't touch the stocks or the bonds. But she had the death certificate, Desmond. That gave her access to the liquid assets, the emergency accounts." I stood up. "Which bank, Carter?" "First National," he said, "the branch on Main Street." I left Carter's office with the file tucked under my jacket. I told him to sit tight and wait for my call. I told him that by tomorrow morning he would need to draft a new will because my current beneficiaries were about to be felons. The bank was quieter than the law office. I walked in and went straight to the manager's office. "Sarah Jenkins has managed my accounts for 10 years. When she saw me, she did not scream. She stood up and covered her mouth with her hands. Tears welled in her eyes. "Mr. Collier," she gasped. We were told." I know, Sarah, I said gently. I am sorry for the shock. I need to see the activity on my personal checking and the emergency savings account. I need to know what happened in the last 4 weeks. She sat down and typed furiously on her keyboard. She spun the monitor around. The screen was a sea of red. Withdrawals, transfers, wire payments. On November 15th, one day after the date on the fake death certificate, a withdrawal of $9,500. Cash. On November 16th, another withdrawal, $9,000. Cash. On November 17th, $9,000. They were structuring the withdrawals to keep them under the $10,000 reporting limit for the IRS. It was smart. It was calculated. It was criminal. Who made these withdrawals, I asked, knowing the answer. Your daughter Sarah said. She brought in the certificate. She said she needed to pay for your funeral expenses. She said bringing your body back from Chile was expensive. She was devastated, Mr. Collier. She was sobbing right here in this chair. I looked at the total. My liquid savings were gone. $30,000 drained in 3 days. Sarah, I said, I need to see the security footage from those days. I need to see her face when she took the money. Sarah hesitated. That is against policy, Mr. Collier. I leaned in. Sarah, that money was stolen. I am alive. That certificate was forged. This is a crime scene and you are the witness. Show me the tape or I call the FBI right now and they shut this branch down for an audit. Sarah paled. She typed a code. The video player opened. She clicked on the file for November 15th. I watched the screen. Tasha sat at the desk. She was wearing a black veil. She was wiping her eyes with a tissue. Sarah handed her a thick envelope of cash. Tasha took it. She stood up. She walked toward the exit. Wait, I said. Switch to the lobby camera. Sarah switched the view. Tasha walked out of the manager's office. She walked through the lobby. As soon as she passed the security guard, she stopped. She pulled the envelope open. She thumbed through the bills. And then she smiled. It was not a sad smile. It was not a relieved smile. It was a predator's smile. She threw her head back and laughed. She high-fived Blake, who was waiting by the door. They hugged. They did a little dance right there in the lobby of the bank while holding the money that was supposed to bury me. I froze the image. That laugh. That was the final nail. Any lingering doubt, any small hope that maybe they were just desperate or misguided died right there on that screen. They were celebrating my death. They were dancing on my grave before I was even in it. I asked Sarah to export the video files to a flash drive. She did it without a word. She looked sick. She realized she had been played. I walked out of the bank with the evidence in my pocket. I had the forged legal documents. I had the video of the theft. I had enough to put them away for 20 years. But prison was too easy. Prison was sterile. I wanted them to feel the fear I felt when I saw my house destroyed. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in. I needed supplies. I went to a professional contractor supply warehouse on the edge of town. I did not buy lumber. I bought theater equipment. I bought 4 high-intensity halogen work lights on tripods, the kind used to light up highway construction sites at night. They generated 5,000 lumens each. They were blinding. I bought a directional microphone and a portable amplifier. I bought a heavy-duty fog machine usually used for leak detection in HVAC systems. I bought a spool of high-tensile steel cable and a handful of industrial padlocks. I loaded the gear into the back of the rideshare car. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. Big project tonight, buddy, he asked. You could say that, I replied. I am setting the stage for a family reunion. I had him drop me off a mile from the house. I hiked the rest of the way, carrying the heavy bags. The physical exertion felt good. It burned off the rage that was threatening to consume me. When I got back to the house, it was dusk. Ryan and Emily were waiting in the kitchen. They looked anxious. They had the lights off. You came back, Ryan said. He sounded relieved. I told you I would, I said. Help me set this up. We went to work. I directed them like a foreman. We positioned the halogen lights in the corners of the living room, aiming them directly at the spot where the safe was exposed. We connected them to a single power strip that I wired into my remote control system. I set up the microphone near the hole in the wall hidden behind a stack of drywall. I ran the cable to the amplifier, which I placed in the server room. I rigged the fog machine in the ventilation duct that fed the living room. Then I went to the windows. I installed the steel cables through the locking mechanisms of the heavy shutters. Even if they managed to override the digital locks, they would not be able to open the windows without bolt cutters. I was sealing the box. By 8:00 p.m. the house was ready. It looked normal from the outside, but inside it was a pressure cooker waiting for someone to light the fire. We sat in the dark kitchen, Ryan, Emily, and me. "Why are you doing all this?" Ryan asked. "You have the evidence. You could just call the cops." I looked at the monitor where the frozen image of Tasha laughing in the bank lobby was still displayed. "Because they broke my home," I said. "They didn't just break the walls, they broke the trust. They broke the contract between a father and a child. If I just send them to jail, they will blame the system. They will blame bad luck. I want them to know exactly why they lost. I want them to look me in the eye when the hammer falls." A pair of headlights swept across the front window. The gravel crunched. "They are here," Emily whispered. I stood up. I checked my phone. The remote app was active. "Showtime," I said. I retreated into the shadows of the server room. Ryan and Emily took their places in the living room. They looked terrified. They looked perfect. The front door beeped. Blake was punching in the code. 12345. The lock clicked. The door opened. Let the games begin. The headlights of a rented cargo van swept across the front windows of the house at exactly 8:00. I sat in the server room and watched the monochrome feed from the driveway camera. The vehicle was nondescript, a white panel van with no markings, but the suspension was riding low. They were carrying something heavy. Ryan and Emily stood in the kitchen, illuminated only by the under-cabinet lighting I had left active. They looked pale. They were holding hands tightly, not out of affection, but out of shared terror. I spoke to them through the hidden intercom system one last time. "Stick to the script," I whispered. "Do not back down. Be greedy. Greed is the only thing they respect." Ryan nodded at the ceiling. He looked ready. He looked like a man who wanted his $50,000 back. The front door opened. I had disabled the biometric lock remotely, allowing them entry. Blake walked in first. He was wearing heavy work boots and coveralls that still had the tag on them. He looked manic. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, darting around the room as if expecting an ambush. But he did not see me. He saw two young people standing between him and his salvation. Tasha followed him. My daughter. She looked thin. Her face was gaunt, the cheekbones sharp under harsh makeup. She was wearing a trench coat and carrying a large duffel bag. She did not look at the house. She did not look at the view. She looked straight at the wall where the hole exposed the safe. She looked at it with a hunger that made my stomach turn. Blake didn't say hello. He turned back to his van and dragged a heavy wheeled cart over the threshold. On the cart sat a machine that made my engineer's heart skip a beat. It was a Hypertherm PowerMax industrial plasma cutter. This wasn't a tool you bought at a hardware store. This was a machine used for severing structural I-beams on bridge demolition sites. It required a 240-volt power supply and a compressed air source. It was dangerous. It was loud. And in the hands of an amateur like Blake, it was a flamethrower waiting to happen. "Where do I plug this in?" Blake barked at Ryan. "I need a heavy-duty outlet, dryer or stove." Ryan pointed to the laundry room off the kitchen. "There is a dryer outlet in there." Blake dragged the cart across my hardwood floors, leaving deep gouges in the finish. He didn't care. He ran the heavy black cable into the laundry room and plugged it in. The machine hummed to life, a deep electrical vibration that resonated through the floorboards. Tasha walked up to Ryan. She stood too close. She smelled of nervous sweat and cheap gin. "You said you couldn't open it," she said, her voice raspy. "You said you didn't touch it." "I didn't," Ryan said, stepping back but keeping his chin up. "I tried a drill. It didn't work. That is why I called you. We had a deal, Tasha. 50-50. Tasha laughed. It was a dry hacking sound. "Yeah, the deal. Just stay out of the way, kid." Blake came back into the living room wearing a welding helmet pushed up on his forehead. He held the cutting torch in his gloved hand like a weapon. He looked at the safe. He looked at the scorch marks from his previous failed attempts with the oxyacetylene torch. "Plasma cuts hotter," he muttered to himself. 30,000 degrees. It will slice this manganese plate like butter. He kicked the coffee table out of the way. He didn't move the rug. He didn't put down a drop cloth. He was going to spray molten steel all over the room. Ryan stepped forward, playing his part perfectly. "Hey, watch the floor. We just bought this place." Blake spun around. He lowered the welding helmet covering his face with the dark glass. He pointed the unlit torch at Ryan. "Shut up," he said. His voice was muffled behind the mask, but the aggression was clear. "Stand back, or I will cut you too." Ryan raised his hands and backed away, pulling Emily with him toward the kitchen. Good. They were out of the splash zone. I watched on the monitor as Blake knelt in front of the safe. He adjusted the amperage dial on the cutter. He primed the air compressor. The hiss of pressurized air filled the room. Tasha stood behind him, vibrating with impatience. "Do it, Blake. Do it now. We don't have time." Blake pulled the trigger. The pilot arc struck with a sound like a cracking whip. A jet of superheated plasma slammed into the steel door of the safe. A shower of sparks erupted, turning the dim living room into a fireworks display. Molten metal sprayed outward, burning holes in the gold wallpaper and scorching the floor. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched scream of tearing metal that drowned out Tasha's excited shouts. I watched the temperature sensors in the living room spike. The smoke detectors I had disabled remotely, or the alarms would be deafening right now. I needed them to focus. I needed them to finish. Blake was clumsy. He didn't know how to maintain a consistent standoff distance. The torch sputtered and gouged. He wasn't cutting a clean line, he was hacking the door apart. He worked his way around the locking mechanism, aiming to sever the bolts that held the door in place. Smoke filled the room, thick and acrid. It smelled of ozone and burning paint. Tasha coughed, covering her mouth with her sleeve, but she didn't move. She stared at the bright blue arc of the plasma flame, mesmerized. "Faster," she screamed over the noise. "Cut it faster." "I need that money tonight, Blake. If I don't transfer the funds by morning, they are going to take the car. They are going to take everything." I listened to her desperation. She wasn't worried about me. She wasn't worried about the morality of robbing her father. She was worried about her car. She was worried about her status. Blake sweated. I could see the perspiration soaking his coveralls. He pushed the torch harder, forcing the plasma stream through the 3-inch steel composite. The metal glowed cherry red, then white hot. Slag dripped onto the floor, hissing. Finally, after 20 minutes of brutal work, the pitch of the cutting sound changed. The torch had punched through the last locking bolt. Blake released the trigger. The plasma arc died. The room was suddenly plunged back into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the glowing red metal of the safe door. Silence returned, heavy and ringing. Blake stood up, panting. He kicked the safe door with his heavy boot. Clang. The door groaned. It was held only by gravity and friction now. The hinges were slag. The bolts were severed. "Help me," Blake wheezed. "It is hot. Use the crowbar." Tasha handed him a pry bar from the duffel bag. Blake jammed the tip into the cooling gap he had cut. He leveraged his weight against it. "Open it!" Ryan shouted from the kitchen. "Let's see the gold!" Blake grunted. He pushed. The heavy steel door shifted. It tilted outward. And then, with a massive crash that shook the house, it fell forward onto the floor, embedding itself in the charred hardwood. The safe was open. The interior of the safe was dark. Smoke drifted out of the cavity. Tasha lunged forward. She didn't care about the heat. She dropped to her knees in front of the open vault. She reached in, ignoring the radiant heat coming from the cut metal. "Where is it?" she screamed. "Where are the bonds?" She pulled her hands out. They were empty. She dove back in. She swept her arms around the interior, frantically feeling for the stacks of bearer bonds she remembered from her childhood. She felt the back wall. She felt the side walls. "It is empty," she shrieked. Her voice cracked. "It is gone." He moved them. That bastard moved them before he died. Blake dropped the pry bar. He ripped the welding helmet off his head. His face was red and streaked with soot. "No," he said. "No. They have to be there. We saw the bank records. He didn't deposit them. They have to be here." He pushed Tasha aside and shoved his own head into the safe. He looked around. "There is nothing," he whispered. "Wait." He reached into the very back of the safe. There was a small shelf hidden in the shadows. Something was resting there. He pulled it out. It was not a stack of bonds. It was not a bar of gold. It was a single white envelope, sealed. Ryan stepped closer. "What is that?" Ryan asked. "Is that the deed?" Blake stood up, holding the envelope with trembling hands. His name was written on the front in my handwriting. For Blake and Tasha. He tore the envelope open. His dirty fingers smudged the white paper. He pulled out the contents. It was a single photograph. Blake stared at it. He stopped breathing. His eyes bulged. He looked like a man who had just seen his own autopsy photo. "What is it?" Tasha demanded, snatching the photo from his hand. "What did he leave?" She looked at the photo. She screamed. It wasn't a scream of anger. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated horror. I knew exactly what they were looking at. I had printed it yesterday at the library in town. It was a high-resolution screen capture from the security camera in my study. The timestamp was clearly visible in the corner, October 12th, 1 month ago. The image showed Blake and Tasha sitting at my desk. Blake was holding a beer. Tasha was holding a pen. She was bent over a document. The document was zoomed in and clear. It was the death certificate. She was signing the witness line. But that wasn't the part that terrified them. The part that terrified them was the angle. The photo was taken from above, from a camera hidden in the smoke detector, a camera they didn't know existed. And written across the bottom of the photo in red marker were 3 words. I am watching. Tasha dropped the photo. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up in the ash and soot. "Who took this?" she whispered. She spun around, looking at the corners of the room, looking for the hidden lens. "He is dead. He is dead. Who took this?" Ryan walked forward. He picked up the photo. He looked at it. He looked at Blake. "You forged his death certificate," Ryan said. His voice was cold. "You didn't inherit this house. You stole it." Blake backed away. He bumped into the hot, safe door and yelped. He looked at the plasma cutter. He looked at Ryan. "We have to go," he said. "Tasha, we have to go. Someone knows." He reached for the plasma torch. I saw his knuckles turn white. He wasn't thinking about leaving. He was thinking about witnesses. He was thinking about the 2 young people standing in the kitchen who had just seen proof of a felony. He raised the torch. "No witnesses," he muttered. I hit the enter key on my keyboard. The magnetic locks on the front door slammed shut with a mechanical thud. The steel shutters on the windows, which I had left partially open, slammed down, sealing the room in metal. The lights cut out instantly, plunging the house into pitch blackness. The only light came from the glowing red metal of the ruined safe door and the small blue power light on the plasma cutter. And then my voice, amplified by the hidden speakers in the ceiling, filled the room. It was deep. It was loud. And it was very, very angry. "Hello, children!" Tasha shrieked. She fell to the floor, covering her ears. Blake spun in circles, waving the torch in the dark. "Who is that? Show yourself." I switched on the single spotlight I had mounted on the ceiling beam. A beam of intense white light cut through the smoke and darkness. It hit the leather armchair in the corner of the room. I was sitting in it. I held a shotgun across my lap. It wasn't loaded, but they didn't know that. "I am the ghost," I said, "and I am here to collect the rent." The photograph lay on the floor amidst the ash and the cooling slag. It stared up at Blake like an accusation from the grave. He looked at the red marker scrawled across the bottom of the image. "I am watching." The words seemed to vibrate in the dim light. Blake's hands were shaking so violently that he dropped the plasma torch. It clattered against the hardwood floor, but the pilot light remained lit, a small blue eye staring back at him in the darkness. "Who took this?" Blake whispered. His voice was thin and reedy. It sounded like air escaping a punctured tire. He spun around, his eyes darting to the corners of the room. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the smoke detectors. He looked at the vents. He was looking for a lens. He was looking for a spy, but he saw nothing but shadows and smoke. Tasha was on her knees. She grabbed the photo. She brought it close to her face. She touched the image of herself signing my death certificate. She tried to rub the red ink off with her thumb as if erasing the words would erase the crime. It smeared. It was real ink. It was fresh ink. "This was taken from inside the house," Tasha said. Her voice rose in pitch. "Someone was here. Someone was watching us when we signed the papers. Blake, we are not alone." Ryan and Emily backed away until they hit the kitchen island. Ryan grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the pot rack. He held it with 2 hands like a shield. He knew what a cornered animal looked like, and he was looking at 2 of them. "We have to go," Blake said. He scrambled backward away from the safe, away from the photo. He grabbed Tasha by the arm and hauled her to her feet. "Leave the tools. Leave everything. We are leaving. Now." He ran for the front door. He didn't care about the money anymore. He didn't care about the debt. He just wanted to be away from the eyes that were watching him. He reached the door. He grabbed the handle. He turned it. It didn't move. He yanked it. The door was solid. It felt like it was welded to the frame. He punched the keypad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The code he had used to enter. The code Miller had given him. The keypad beeped. A low, dissonant tone. Access denied. Blake pounded on the door with his fist. Open it. Open the damn door. I sat in the server room and watched him panic. It was a satisfying sight. I hovered my finger over the enter key on my keyboard. I had already engaged the magnetic locks, but now it was time for the physical barriers. I wanted them to hear the sound of their prison closing. I pressed the key. The sound was deafening. Clang, clang, clang. 12 solid steel deadbolts driven by high-torque solenoids slammed home into the reinforced door frames of every exit in the house. The front door, the back door, the garage door. The sound echoed through the frame of the house like a hammer striking an anvil. It was the sound of finality. Blake jumped back from the door as if it had bitten him. He looked at the lock. He saw the steel bolt that had engaged automatically. He tried to turn the manual thumb turn. It was frozen. I had disengaged the manual overrides. The windows. Tasha screamed. She ran to the large picture window overlooking the lake, the view that was supposed to sell the house for $1 million. She reached for the latch. I typed another command. The heavy steel security shutters on the exterior of the house began to descend. I had installed them for fire protection to shield the glass from radiant heat during forest fires. Now they were prison bars. The motors groaned. The steel slats rolled down over the glass. The view of the moonlit lake disappeared inch by inch. Darkness swallowed the windows. Tasha pounded on the glass. Stop! Stop it! The shutters hit the sills with a heavy thud. The house was sealed. There was no way in. There was no way out. We were inside a steel box. The only light came from the interior LEDs and the blue glow of the plasma cutter on the floor. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and fear. "What is happening?" Blake screamed. He spun in a circle. "Who is doing this?" Ryan looked at the ceiling. He knew. He looked at the camera lens concealed in the motion sensor. He didn't say a word. He just gripped the frying pan tighter. It was time for the next phase. Sensory deprivation. I reached for the master power breaker on my control panel. This switch physically cut the connection to the grid and isolated the house from the battery backup. I flipped the switch. Blackness. Absolute total darkness hit the room like a physical wave. The LEDs died. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The ventilation fans spun down into silence. The only thing left was the sound of 4 people breathing in the dark, and the blue pilot light of the plasma cutter. It cast long dancing shadows against the walls. It made Blake look like a demon. I waited. I let the silence stretch. I let them listen to the house settle. I let them hear their own heartbeats. Psychological warfare is about timing. You have to let the fear marinate. "Please," Tasha whispered in the dark. Her voice was small. "Please let us out. We won't say anything. We'll just leave." I reached for the microphone on my desk. I adjusted the gain. I wanted my voice to sound like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere. I wanted it to vibrate in their chests. I pressed the talk button. "Hello, children." My voice boomed through the hidden architectural speakers in the vaulted ceiling. It was deep, distorted slightly by the bass boost I had applied. Tasha screamed. It was a raw, primal sound. She dropped to the floor and covered her head with her hands. "Dad!" she shrieked. "Dad, is that you?" Blake spun around, waving his arms in the dark. "No. No. He is dead. He is dead. I have the certificate. This is a trick. Who is doing this?" I leaned into the microphone. "A certificate is just paper, Blake. Paper burns. Paper lies. But steel remembers." I activated the single spotlight I had rigged on the exposed ceiling beam. It was a theater light, high-intensity focused. I had aimed it perfectly earlier that evening. A shaft of blinding white light cut through the smoke and darkness. It hit the corner of the room. It illuminated the leather armchair I had placed there, the chair that used to sit by the fireplace before they sold it. I had brought it back from the garage. I was sitting in the chair. I was wearing my old field jacket, the one with the grease stains and the frayed collar. I had a shotgun resting across my knees. It was a Remington 870 pump action. It was unloaded, but the sound it made when you racked the slide was a universal language. I sat perfectly still. I stared straight at them. The light was behind me, casting my face in shadow, making my eyes look like hollow pits. Tasha looked up. She squinted against the glare. She saw me. Her face went slack. Her jaw dropped. She stopped breathing. She looked like she was having a stroke. Buh, she stammered. Say it, Tasha, I said. Say my name. Dad, she whispered. You are a ghost. You are a ghost. I racked the slide of the shotgun. Ch-chunk. The metallic sound was loud and crisp in the silent house. Ghosts don't carry 12-gauge shotguns, Tasha, I said. Blake stared at me. He was trembling, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was a chemical cocktail of adrenaline, terror, and the realization that his life was over. He looked at me and he did not see a father-in-law. He saw a debt collector. He saw a prison sentence. He saw the end of his lies. You fell, he said. His voice was shaking. The report said you fell. 2,000 feet. No one survives that. I walked out, I said. It took me 3 days. I broke 2 ribs. I ate lichen. I drank snowmelt. But I walked out Blake. Because I had something to come back to. Or so I thought. I stood up. I kept the shotgun leveled at his chest. I walked into the pool of light. I came back to find my house raped. I came back to find my accounts drained. I came back to find my daughter signing my death warrant while eating pepperoni pizza at my table. I took a step closer. The floorboards creaked under my boots. You didn't mourn me, Tasha. You cashed me out. Tasha began to sob. It wasn't a cry of sorrow. It was the cry of a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. Only the jar was a retirement fund, and the punishment was federal prison. Blake made me do it, she wailed. She pointed a shaking finger at her husband. He owes money, Dad. Bad money. He said they would kill us. He said we had to do it. Blake turned on her. His face twisted into a snarl. You lying witch. You signed the papers. You practiced the signature for 3 days. You said the old man was useless to us alive. I watched them turn on each other. It was pathetic. It was expected. Rats always eat each other when the ship goes down. Quiet, I roared. They froze. I looked at Blake. You owe $200,000, I said. Blake nodded. He was sweating profusely. Yes. Yes, Desmond. Please. If I don't pay them tomorrow, they will kill me. Help me. You have the money. You have millions. Just help me and I will disappear. I will sign the divorce papers. I will leave the state. Just pay them. I looked at him with disgust. I looked at the man who had promised to take care of my daughter, the man who had smashed my walls with a sledgehammer. I do have the money, I said. It is in the safe. Or what is left of it. I pointed the shotgun barrel toward the ruined safe door. But I am not going to give it to you, Blake. I am not going to pay your debts. I am going to let you face the consequences of your own actions. Blake's face changed. The begging vanished. The fear remained, but it curdled into something else. Desperation. Violent, cornered desperation. He looked at the front door. Locked. He looked at the windows. Barred. He looked at Ryan and Emily, who were cowering in the kitchen. Witnesses. He looked at me. An old man. 68 years old. Standing between him and the only thing that could save his life. He looked down at the floor. The plasma cutter was there. The torch was still in his hand. The cable was long. He picked it up. He squeezed the trigger. The pilot arc hissed. A blue flame of ionized gas spit from the nozzle. It was hot enough to melt steel. It was certainly hot enough to melt flesh. Give me the money, old man, Blake said. His voice was low, guttural. He took a step toward me. Blake, don't. Tasha screamed. He ignored her. He was past reason. He was in survival mode. You are dead anyway, he said. You are legally dead. If I burn you down here, no one will know. It will just be a fire, a tragic fire. He raised the torch like a knife. The blue light illuminated the madness in his eyes. I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. Come and get it, son, I said. He lunged. He moved fast for a big man. He covered the distance between the safe and the armchair in 2 strides. The plasma torch hissed through the air, leaving a trail of blue fire. He wasn't aiming for the gun. He was aiming for my face. I sidestepped. I am old, but I knew he was coming. I pivoted on my left foot, letting his momentum carry him past me. The heat of the torch singed the sleeve of my jacket. I smelled burning cotton. Blake stumbled but recovered quickly. He swung the torch back around in a wide arc. I brought the stock of the shotgun up. I slammed it into his kidneys. It was a solid hit, but his adrenaline was too high. He barely grunted. He turned and slashed with the torch again. I backed up. I needed distance. A shotgun is a range weapon. A plasma cutter is a melee weapon. In close quarters, he had the advantage. Ryan shouted from the kitchen, "Hey!" Blake ignored him. He was focused on me. He backed me toward the wall with the gold wallpaper. "You should have stayed dead," Blake screamed. He thrust the torch forward. I blocked with the barrel of the shotgun. The plasma arc hit the steel of the gun. Sparks showered my face. The metal heated up instantly in my hands. I dropped the gun. It clattered to the floor, useless. I was unarmed. Blake smiled. It was a rictus of terror and triumph. "Goodbye, Dad," he said. He raised the torch for a killing strike, and then a cloud of white powder exploded in his face. Ryan had stepped out of the shadows. He was holding the industrial fire extinguisher from the kitchen. He had pulled the pin. He aimed the nozzle right at Blake's head and squeezed the handle. A thick jet of monoammonium phosphate chemical powder blasted Blake in the eyes, mouth, and nose. Blake screamed. He was blinded. He was choking. He dropped the torch. He clawed at his face, trying to clear the chemical from his eyes. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward. I kicked the plasma torch away, skittering it across the floor. Then I delivered a right cross to Blake's jaw. I put 40 years of manual labor into that punch. I put the grief of my wife into it. I put the betrayal of my daughter into it. Blake's head snapped back. His knees buckled. He collapsed to the floor, wheezing and coughing, covered in white dust. I stood over him, breathing hard. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the release of tension. Ryan stood next to me, holding the extinguisher like a weapon. He looked at me. He nodded. "Nice shot," I said. "Thanks," Ryan said. "I played baseball in college." I looked at Tasha. She was huddled in the corner, staring at her husband writhing on the floor. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Bah," she stammered again. "Save it," I said. I walked over to the wall switch and hit the lights. The room flooded with harsh overhead light, exposing the carnage. The ruined wall, the melted safe, the white powder covering everything. I looked at the mess. My sanctuary was destroyed, but the rot had been cut out. I walked over to the kitchen counter where my phone was sitting. I picked it up. I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? "I need the police," I said calmly, "and an ambulance. I have intruders in my home, and one of them has a broken jaw." I hung up. I looked at Tasha. She was trying to stand up. "Sit down," I barked. She sat. "We are going to wait for the police," I said. "And while we wait, you are going to listen. You are going to listen to every single thing I have to say, and you are not going to say a word." I pulled a chair over and sat down in front of them. "You wanted my money," I said. "You wanted my legacy. Well, you are going to get it. You are going to get exactly what you earned." I looked at the hole in the wall. The safe was open. The empty envelope lay on the floor. But the real treasure wasn't in the safe. The real treasure was the look on their faces when they realized they had lost everything. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The cavalry was coming. But the war was already won. The cloud of monoammonium phosphate settled over the living room like toxic snow. Blake lay on the floor, curling into a fetal position, clutching his face. He wheezed. He coughed. The chemical powder had coated his throat and eyes, turning his aggression into helpless agony. Ryan stood over him with the fire extinguisher raised high, ready to strike again, if the man so much as twitched. I stepped out of the shadows of the server room entrance. I walked into the pool of harsh halogen light. I held my Remington 870 shotgun at my hip. The safety was on and the chamber was empty, but in the hands of a man they thought was a ghost, it looked like the judgment of God. I kicked the plasma cutter away from Blake. It slid across the floor and hit the baseboard with a heavy thud. The blue pilot light flickered and died. I looked down at my son-in-law. He was a mess of snot and tears and white powder. He looked up at me with one red swollen eye. He tried to speak, but only a dry croak came out. "Stay down," I said. My voice was low and steady, the voice of a foreman on a job site where someone had just made a fatal error. "Do not move. Do not speak. You are currently trespassing in my home and assaulting my guests. In this state, I have the legal right to defend my property with lethal force. Do not give me a reason to exercise that right." Blake nodded frantically. He understood violence. He understood power. He was a bully, and bullies always crumble when they meet a bigger wall. I turned my attention to Tasha. She was pressed against the far wall, her expensive trench coat smeared with soot from the ruined safe. She stared at me. Her eyes were wide, huge saucers of disbelief. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Dad," she whispered. It was a word she hadn't used with affection in 20 years. "Dad, please." I ignored her. I walked to the center of the room. I picked up the remote control for the main entertainment system. I had installed an 85-inch 8K television on the north wall 2 years ago. Tasha used to complain it was too big. She used to say it ruined the aesthetic of the room. Tonight it was going to be the most important screen she ever watched. I pressed the power button. The massive screen flared to life. The brightness was blinding in the dim room. I had prepared a playlist. I had edited the footage myself in the server room over the last 24 hours. I called it The Evidence. "Sit down, Tasha," I commanded. She slid down the wall until she hit the floor. She couldn't stand. Her legs had turned to water. I pressed play. The video filled the room. The audio was crisp, amplified by the surround sound speakers. The first clip was dated 4 months ago. It showed the dining room. Tasha sat at the head of the table, my table. A notary public I recognized from town sat across from her. A document lay between them. "I certify that Desmond Collier is deceased," Tasha said on the screen. Her voice was steady. It was cold. "I have received confirmation from the authorities in Chile. His body was lost in the avalanche. We need to expedite the transfer of assets. My husband and I are the sole beneficiaries." She signed the paper. She pressed down hard with the pen. She didn't hesitate. She didn't cry. She signed my death warrant with the same casual indifference she used to sign a credit card receipt for a latte. In the living room, the real Tasha let out a sob. She covered her mouth with her hands. She couldn't look away. I skipped to the next clip. October 14th. The screen showed the living room before the renovation. The beautiful white oak paneling was intact. Blake stood in the center of the frame holding the sledgehammer. Tasha stood next to him holding a bottle of champagne. "Smash it," Tasha said on the video. Her face was twisted in a grin of pure malice. "Smash it all, Blake. I hate this house. I hate his smell. I want it gone. Tear it down so we can find the money." Blake swung the hammer. The sound of wood splintering echoed through the real living room loud as a gunshot. On screen he laughed. He hit the wall again and again, destroying the growth chart, destroying the craftsmanship, destroying my memory. "Why?" Tasha shouted at the screen. "Why are you showing this?" "Because you need to see what you are," I said. "You aren't a grieving daughter. You are a vandal. You are a looter." I pressed the button for the final clip. This was the one that would break her. This was the one that broke me when I first found it. It was dated November 1st. The kitchen. Tasha and Blake were arguing. Blake was pacing. "We can't find the bonds," Blake yelled. "The safe won't open. The torch isn't working. We are running out of time, Tasha. Vinny wants his money." Tasha was leaning against the counter, drinking wine directly from the bottle. "Relax, babe," she said. "We will sell the house. We will defraud some buyer if we have to." "But what if he comes back?" Blake asked. "What if he isn't dead? What if he just lost his phone?" Tasha turned to the camera. She looked right into the lens, though she didn't know it was there. Her eyes were hard. They were dead. "Then we kill him," she said. "It is best if the old man is dead. He is useless to us alive. If he walks through that door, Blake, I will push him down the stairs myself. He is worth more as a corpse than a father." The video froze on her face on that statement. He is worth more as a corpse. Silence filled the room. It was heavy. It was suffocating. Tasha stared at the frozen image of herself planning my murder. She looked at me. She saw the shotgun. She saw the look in my eyes. She realized that I had heard every word. I had seen every betrayal. There was no excuse left. There was no lie big enough to cover this. She broke. She scrambled across the floor on her hands and knees, moving away from Blake, moving toward me. "Dad," she screamed. "It wasn't me. It was him. It was all him." She pointed a shaking finger at Blake, who was still wiping powder from his eyes. "He owes money, Dad. He owes bad people. He forced me. He said they would kill me if I didn't help him. He made me sign the papers. He made me say those things. I was scared. I was acting. I love you, Dad. I never wanted to hurt you. He is the monster. He is the one who gambles. He is the one who ruined us." Blake sat up. He heard her. He heard his wife, his partner in crime, throwing him to the wolves to save her own skin. His face twisted in rage. "You liar!" Blake roared. His voice was raw. You came up with the idea. You said the old man was sitting on a gold mine. You forged the signature on the deed. You wanted the money for your boutique. You wanted the status. Don't you dare pin this on me, Tasha. You are just as guilty." They screamed at each other. They hurled accusations and insults, tearing each other apart with the same viciousness they had used to tear apart my home. It was pathetic. It was disgusting. It was exactly what I wanted. "Silence," I shouted. I racked the shotgun again, clack, clack. They froze. They looked at me. I walked to the kitchen island. I placed the shotgun on the counter out of their reach but close to my hand. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I smoothed it out on the granite surface. I placed a heavy black pen next to it. I looked at them. I looked at the ruin of my family. "You are both guilty," I said. "You are both felons. You are both facing 20 years in federal prison for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. And Blake, you are facing a death sentence from your bookie if you don't pay up by noon tomorrow." Blake flinched. He knew it was true. "However," I said, "I am a practical man. I am an engineer. I believe in efficiency. I don't want to spend the next 5 years in court hearings listening to you two lie. I want a swift resolution." I tapped the paper on the counter. "This is a sworn affidavit," I said. "It is a full confession. It details the forgery, the theft, the vandalism, and the intent to defraud Ryan and Emily. It names one person as the mastermind and the other as a coerced accomplice." I looked at Blake. "Blake, you owe $200,000. I have that money. It is in my other account. I can wire it to your creditor in 10 minutes. I can save your life. I can make the debt disappear." Blake's eyes widened. Hope, a desperate, ugly hope, flared in his face. "You would do that?" he asked. I nodded. "I would. But there is a price. The price is that you sign this paper. You confess that you forced Tasha to do everything. You confess that you threatened her. You take the fall. You go to prison. But you go to prison alive, and your legs stay unbroken." Blake looked at the paper. He looked at Tasha. Tasha gasped. "Dad, no. You can't. He will destroy me." I turned to Tasha. Or I said, "Tasha, you sign it. You confess that you manipulated Blake. You confess that you used his gambling addiction to force him to help you steal my estate. You take the full blame. And what do I get?" Tasha asked. Her voice was trembling. "You get freedom," I said. "I will refuse to press charges against you. I will tell the DA that you were a victim of his coercion. Blake goes to jail for the debt and the fraud. You walk away. You get nothing from the estate, but you stay out of prison." I stepped back. I crossed my arms. "Only one of you gets the deal," I said. "The first person to pick up that pen and sign their name saves themselves. The other one takes the full weight of the law and my wrath." The air in the room grew tight. It vibrated with tension. It was the prisoner's dilemma, stripped of all theory and placed on a granite countertop in a cold house. Blake looked at the pen. He looked at Tasha. He saw a woman who had just blamed him for everything. He saw a woman who had convinced him to commit felonies. He saw a future where his knees were shattered by a loan shark. Tasha looked at the pen. She looked at Blake. She saw a weak man who had dragged her down. She saw a future in an orange jumpsuit. She saw a chance to walk away and play the victim. They looked at each other. The love, if there ever was any, was gone. There was only survival instinct now. I checked my watch. "You have 10 seconds, I said. 1. Blake shifted his weight. He was closer to the island. 2. Tasha's eyes narrowed. She saw him move. 3. "I don't need to think about it," Blake yelled. He lunged. He scrambled up from the floor, ignoring the pain in his jaw, ignoring the burning in his eyes. He threw himself toward the island. He reached for the pen. "No," Tasha screamed. She tackled him. She threw her body against his legs. They crashed into the cabinets. They clawed at each other. Tasha raked her nails down Blake's face. Blake kicked her away. It was a brawl, a violent, desperate fight for the right to betray the other. Ryan watched from the corner, his mouth open. He had never seen people behave like this. He had never seen the raw, ugly core of greed exposed so nakedly. I stood still. I watched them fight. I watched my daughter bite her husband's hand. I watched my son-in-law shove my daughter into the refrigerator. This was my family. This was what I had built. Blake was stronger. He shoved Tasha hard, sending her sliding across the floor. He scrambled to the counter. He grabbed the pen. His hand was shaking so hard he could barely hold it. He slammed the paper down. "I sign," he wheezed. "I sign. Pay the debt, Desmond. Pay it. I will take the fall. Just save me." He scribbled his name. He didn't even read the text. He signed his life away to save his skin. He dropped the pen. He looked at me, panting, blood dripping from a scratch on his cheek. "It is done," he said. I signed. "Pay them." Tasha sat on the floor weeping. She looked at me with hatred. "You bastard," she hissed. "You tricked us. You pitted us against each other." I picked up the paper. I checked the signature. It was valid. I folded it and put it in my pocket. "You are right, Tasha," I said. "I did trick you." I looked at Blake. "I lied, Blake," I said. Blake froze. "What? I am not going to pay your debt," I said. "I am not going to wire money to any criminals. I am not going to save you." Blake's face went white. "But you said, 'The deal.' I signed. I know I said, and now I have a signed confession that you are the ringleader. I have proof that you dragged my daughter into this, which will be very useful for the police report." "But the money," Blake stammered. "The loan sharks. They will kill me." I shrugged. "That sounds like a structural problem, Blake. And frankly, I am retired. I don't fix structural problems anymore, especially when the foundation is rotten." Blake stared at me. The realization washed over him. He had betrayed his wife, he had confessed to a felony, and he had gained absolutely nothing. He was destroyed. "You can't do this," he whispered. I walked over to the keypad on the wall. I entered a code. The steel shutters on the windows began to retract. The moonlight flooded back into the room. "I just did," I said. I looked out the window. Blue and red lights were flashing in the distance coming up the long driveway. "And it looks like your ride is here." The ink was barely dry on the paper before Blake began to scream. He did not just sign his name. He signed a declaration of war against his wife. He threw the pen down and pointed a trembling finger at Tasha, who was still huddled on the floor. "It was her idea," Blake shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "She is the one who Googled how long you had to be missing before she could file the paperwork. She is the one who practiced your signature on legal pads for 3 nights straight. She told me you were a mean old bastard who deserved to die alone in the snow." Tasha let out a sound that was half shriek, half growl. She launched herself off the floor. She didn't look like my daughter anymore. She looked like a cornered rat biting at the trap. She tackled Blake, slamming him into the kitchen island. Her nails raked down his face, leaving bright red streaks across his cheek. "You liar!" she screamed. "You coward! You sat at our kitchen table and told me that if I didn't help you get the money, your bookie would come for me too. You said they would hurt me, Blake. You said I had no choice." She slapped him. It was a clumsy, desperate blow. Blake shoved her back. He was bigger, stronger, and fueled by the terror of a man who sees his life ending. He pushed her hard enough that she slid across the floor and hit the baseboard. "She is lying!" Desmond Blake yelled at me, his eyes wide and frantic. "She wanted the money for a boutique. She wanted a Mercedes. She said waiting for you to die naturally was taking too long. She is the monster here, not me. I am just a guy who made some bad bets. She is the one who wanted to erase you." I stood still, leaning against the counter, my arms crossed. I watched them tear each other apart. It was fascinating in a gruesome way, like watching a bridge collapse in slow motion. You could see exactly where the stress fractures were. You could see that the structural integrity of their marriage had never been real. It was held together by greed, and when the weight of consequences hit, it shattered. Tasha sat up. She wiped blood from her lip. She looked at Blake with a hatred so pure it was almost cold. She reached into the pocket of her trench coat. Her hand came out holding her phone. "You want to talk about monsters, Blake," she hissed. "Let's talk about monsters." She tapped the screen with a shaking thumb. She held the phone up high like a talisman. "I knew you would do this," she said. "I knew the second things got hard you would throw me under the bus. That is why I kept this." She pressed play. A voice tinny and distorted by the phone speaker filled the silent room. It was Blake's voice. But it wasn't the whining, pleading voice I was hearing now. It was low, angry, and violent. "Listen to me, Tasha. You are going to sign that death certificate, and you are going to smile while you do it. I don't care if you feel guilty. I don't care if he is your father. If I don't get that money, Vinny is going to cut my thumbs off. And if I lose my thumbs, Tasha, I am going to break your neck. Do you understand me? We are in this together. If I go down, you go in the ground. The recording ended. Silence returned to the room, heavy and suffocating. Blake went pale. He looked at the phone as if it were a gun pointed at his head. He backed away until he hit the refrigerator. "You recorded me," he whispered. Tasha smiled. It was a broken, ugly smile. "Insurance, babe," she said. "Just like you taught me." I clapped. The sound was loud and sharp. Clap, clap, clap. "Bravo," I said. I walked over to the island and picked up the affidavit Blake had signed. I folded it neatly and placed it in my breast pocket. That was truly spectacular. In less than 5 minutes, you have both provided irrefutable proof of conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and death threats. I looked at Tasha. "You recorded your husband threatening to kill you," I said. "That is smart. It proves he coerced you." Tasha nodded eagerly, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "Yes, Dad. See? I was a victim. He made me do it." I nodded slowly. "But you didn't take that recording to the police, Tasha. You didn't come to me. You kept it. You kept it as leverage to ensure you got your share of the inheritance. You weren't scared for your life. You were protecting your investment." Her face fell. The victim mask slipped. "And you, Blake," I said, turning to him, "you just signed a confession admitting you were the ringleader. You admitted you forced her, and now we have audio of you threatening to snap her neck." I checked my watch. "Well, I think we are done here." Blake stepped forward. His hands were shaking. "The deal, Desmond. You said you would pay the debt. I signed the paper. I did what you asked. Wire the money, please. It is almost midnight." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had turned my daughter into a felon. I sighed. "Actually, Blake, I need to tell you something." I lied. Blake froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I am not going to wire $200,000 to a loan shark," I said. "I am not going to pay your gambling debts. I am not going to save you." "But you promised," Blake stammered. "The contract." I tapped my pocket. "This isn't a contract, Blake. It is a confession. And I am not a bank. I am a father who just watched his children try to eat each other alive." "You can't do this," Tasha screamed. "You can't let them kill him." I looked at her. "I am not letting them do anything, Tasha. I am simply removing myself from the equation. I am letting gravity take its course. You built this house of cards. Now you get to live inside it while it falls." "But the witnesses," Blake said, looking at Ryan and Emily, who were still standing by the stove holding the frying pan and the fire extinguisher. "They saw you make the deal. They heard you promise." I looked at Ryan. "Did I promise anything?" "Ryan?" I asked. Ryan shook his head slowly. He looked at Blake with disgust. "I didn't hear a promise," he said. "I heard a negotiation, and I heard you confess to everything." Blake let out a roar of frustration. He lunged toward me. He didn't have a weapon, but he had the mass of a desperate man. "You tricked me," he screamed. "You old bastard!" I didn't move. I didn't reach for the shotgun. I didn't have to. The door to the pantry next to the refrigerator swung open. 2 men stepped out. One was wearing a crisp gray suit. That was Carter Banks, my attorney. He held a legal pad and a pen. He looked bored. The other man was wearing a beige uniform with a star pinned to his chest. He was holding a service pistol at the low ready. That was Sheriff Miller. We fished for bass together on Sundays. He had been sitting on a stool in my pantry for 2 hours drinking my coffee and listening to every word. Police Sheriff Miller shouted, his voice booming in the enclosed space. "Get on the ground, now!" Blake stopped mid-lunge. He saw the gun. He saw the badge. His momentum died. He collapsed. He didn't fall, he just melted. He dropped to his knees and put his hands on his head. He started to cry. Loud, heaving sobs of a man who knows it is over. Tasha stared at the sheriff. She knew him. She had grown up waving to him at the 4th of July parade. "Sheriff Miller," she whispered. "Hello, Tasha," the sheriff said. His voice wasn't friendly, it was sad. "Get on the ground." Tasha looked at me. "Dad, you called the police. You set us up." I looked down at her. "I didn't set you up, Tasha. I just turned on the lights. You did the rest." Carter Banks stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the confession in my pocket. "That document is admissible," he said calmly. Along with the video footage, the audio recording from the daughter's phone, and the testimony of the 3 witnesses present. I believe that covers all the bases, Desmond. I nodded. "Thank you, Carter." I walked over to Blake. He was curled up on the floor weeping into the sawdust. "You were worried about your kneecaps, Blake," I said. "You don't have to worry anymore. The county jail is very secure. Your loan sharks can't get to you in solitary confinement." I leaned down close to his ear. "In a way, I just saved your life. You should thank me." Blake looked up at me. His eyes were full of hate. "Go to hell," he whispered. I stood up and looked around the room. The ruined walls, the destroyed safe, the toxic dust. "I am already there, son," I said, "but at least I own the place." Sheriff Miller stepped forward with handcuffs. He cuffed Blake first, then Tasha. The sound of the ratchets clicking tight was the loudest sound in the world. "Take them away, Jim," I said to the sheriff. "Please, get them out of my house." The sheriff nodded. He hauled Blake to his feet. He grabbed Tasha by the arm. She was limp. She was in shock. As they dragged her toward the front door, she looked back at me one last time. "I am pregnant," she said. The room stopped. Ryan gasped. Emily put a hand to her mouth. I froze. "I am pregnant, Dad," Tasha repeated. Her voice was desperate, a last-ditch effort, a final card to play. "You are going to be a grandfather. You can't send me to prison. The baby. Think about the baby." I looked at her stomach. It was flat under the trench coat. "Wait," I said. The sheriff stopped. I looked at Tasha. I looked for a tell. I looked for a lie. But she looked terrified. And for the first time in this entire nightmare, I felt a crack in my resolve. A grandchild. That was the dream. That was the legacy. "Is it true?" I asked. "Yes," she sobbed. "I found out last week. Please, Dad, don't let my baby be born in a cage." I looked at Carter. "Check it," I said. Carter frowned. "Desmond medical records are private." "I don't care," I snapped. "Check it. You have her power of attorney on file from when she was in college. See if it is still active. Call the hospital. Call her OB/GYN. Find out if she is lying." Carter pulled out his phone. "I will try," he said. He stepped into the kitchen to make the call. We waited. The sheriff held them by the door. Blake looked down at the floor. He didn't look at Tasha. He didn't look relieved about a baby. He looked defeated. 5 minutes passed. The silence was agonizing. Tasha wept softly. I stood there feeling the hope bloom in my chest against my will. A grandchild. Maybe there was a reason to forgive. Maybe there was a reason to stop this. Carter walked back into the room. He looked grim. He looked at me and shook his head. "I just spoke to the administrator at County General," Carter said. "Tasha's records are digital. I still had access codes from the trust setup. And I asked." Carter looked at Tasha. His eyes were cold. "She had a tubal ligation 2 years ago, Desmond. It was an elective procedure. She cannot get pregnant. She is sterile." I looked at Tasha. She stopped crying instantly. The tears vanished. Her face went hard. She realized the lie had failed. She shrugged. "It was worth a shot," she said. "You are a sentimental old fool. I knew the baby card was my only chance." The crack in my heart sealed shut. It didn't just seal, it calcified. It turned into stone. "Get her out of here," I said. My voice was dead. "Get her out before I forget that I am not a murderer." The sheriff shoved them through the door. I watched them go. I watched my daughter vanish into the night, into the back of a patrol car. I turned back to the room. Ryan and Emily were staring at me. "I am sorry you had to see that," I said. I sat down in my armchair. I felt very old. I felt very tired. But the house was quiet. The rats were gone. And for the first time in a year, I was truly home. The handcuffs clicked shut around Blake's wrists with a sound that was more final than the slamming of the front door. Sheriff Miller did not handle him gently. He spun Blake around and marched him toward the open doorway where the cool night air waited to cool his fevered desperation. Tasha followed, her wrist secured behind her back, her expensive trench coat bunched up and ruined. She was not screaming anymore. She was hyperventilating. The reality of the steel cuffs had stripped away her arrogance, leaving only the trembling shell of a woman who had gambled her life and lost. I followed them out onto the porch. The flashing blue and red lights of the patrol cars painted the trees in a surreal strobe light horror. Carter Banks walked beside me, his legal pad tucked under his arm, his face impassive. He was witnessing the destruction of a family, but to him it was just the execution of a contract, the contract of cause and effect. Officer Martinez, a young deputy I had known since he was a boy. Scout stepped forward with a clipboard. He looked at Blake, then at Tasha. He cleared his throat. He did not look happy to be there, but he did his duty. "You are both under arrest," Martinez announced. His voice carried over the hum of the idling engines. He began to read the list. It was a long list. It was a heavy list. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, forgery of federal documents, grand larceny, vandalism of private property in excess of $5,000, breaking and entering. Blake sagged against the patrol car. He looked like a man whose skeleton had been removed. But Martinez was not finished. He looked at me, then back at the suspects. "And due to the audio evidence obtained regarding the premeditated intent to cause the death of Desmond Collier to facilitate an inheritance claim, you are also being charged with conspiracy to commit capital murder." The words hung in the cold mountain air. Capital murder. That was not a white-collar crime. That was not something you plea bargained down to probation. That was life in a cage. Tasha gasped. It was a wet, choking sound. "No," she stammered. "No, we were just talking. We never did anything. It was just talk." "Intent is a crime, Tasha," I said from the porch. "You bought the death certificate. You emptied the accounts. You discussed pushing me down the stairs. That is not talk. That is a plan." Blake looked up. His eyes were wild, darting around the driveway. He wasn't looking for a lawyer. He wasn't looking for mercy. He was looking for money. He remembered the debt. He remembered the deadline, noon tomorrow. If he went to jail tonight without paying Vinny, he was a dead man. His eyes landed on Ryan. Ryan and Emily had followed us out. They stood near the garage, huddled together for warmth. Ryan was still holding his backpack, the backpack that contained $50,000 in cash. Blake lunged. He didn't get far. Sheriff Miller grabbed his arm and slammed him back against the hood of the cruiser. But Blake didn't stop screaming. The money, Blake howled. He twisted his neck, straining to look at Ryan. "The deposit. You owe me the deposit. We had a verbal contract. Give me the cash." It was pathetic. It was the desperation of a drowning man trying to grab a floating twig. He thought that if he could just get his hands on that envelope, he could somehow pay off the loan shark from inside a holding cell. He thought money could still save him. "That is my money," Blake screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "Ryan, don't you steal from me. Hand it over." Ryan looked at the backpack. He looked at Blake. He looked at me. He looked terrified that the police might confiscate the cash as evidence. I walked down the steps. The gravel crunched under my boots. I walked over to Ryan. "Give me the bags, son," I said softly. Ryan hesitated. It was everything they had. "Trust me," I said. Ryan handed me the backpack. It was heavy. I unzipped the main compartment. I pulled out the thick manila envelope Miller had taken from them earlier that day. I had retrieved it from Miller's briefcase before he fled. No, Miller had fled with it. Wait. I paused. The logic had to hold. Miller had left with the money, but I had told Ryan I would get it back. I looked at the sheriff. "Jim, did you stop a white Lexus on the way up here?" Sheriff Miller smiled, a tight, grim smile. "We sure did, Desmond. He was doing 80 in a 40. We found a lot of cash in his briefcase. We seized it as proceeds of a crime. It is in the trunk of my car." I nodded. "Good. That is evidence. But this." I reached into my own jacket pocket. I pulled out a checkbook. I had prepared this earlier. I wrote a check. I dated it. I signed it with my architectural fountain pen. Blue ink. Waterproof. I handed the check to Emily. She looked at it. Her hands shook. It was made out for $60,000. "That covers your deposit," I said, "and $10,000 for the acting fee." "You two were very convincing." Emily started to cry. She grabbed my hand and squeezed it. "Thank you. Oh, God, thank you." Blake saw the transaction. He saw me hand the money. He saw his last hope of paying Vinny vanish. He didn't know it wasn't the cash from the bag. He just saw wealth moving away from him. "No," Blake roared. It was an animal sound, a sound of pure loss. "That is mine. I earned it. I fixed up the house. I managed the estate. You owe me, Desmond. You owe me." I walked over to the patrol car. I stood inches from his face. "You didn't fix the house, Blake," I said. You broke it. You didn't manage the estate, you looted it, and I don't owe you a damn thing except a front row seat to your own destruction. Sheriff Miller shoved Blake into the back seat. He slammed the door. Blake threw himself against the window, screaming, fogging up the glass. He looked like a rabid dog in a kennel. Tasha was next. She didn't scream. She looked at me with dead eyes as Martinez guided her into the second car. She didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me as if I were the one who had betrayed her. The doors closed. The engines revved. The convoy of police vehicles turned around in the gravel driveway and headed back down the mountain road. The lights faded. The sirens died away. Silence returned to the lake house. I stood in the driveway for a long time. The cold wind bit through my jacket. I felt hollow. I had won. I had protected my property. I had punished the guilty. But I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a man who had just cut off his own gangrenous limb. It was necessary for survival, but it still left a stump. Ryan and Emily came over. "Mr. Collier," Ryan said, "are you going to be okay?" I looked at the house. The windows were dark. The shutters were still down. It looked like a bunker. "I will be fine," I said. "I have a lot of repairs to do. You should go," I told them. "Take the money, start your family, and be careful who you trust." They nodded. They walked to their car. They drove away. I was alone. I went back inside. I turned on the lights in the kitchen. I made a pot of coffee. I didn't drink alcohol anymore tonight. I needed a clear head. I sat at the island and stared at the hole in the wall. The safe was still open, a gaping mouth in the ruin of my living room. 1 hour passed, then 2. My phone rang. It was a local number, the county detention center. I stared at the screen. I should let it go to voicemail. I should block the number. I had said everything I needed to say. But curiosity is a curse. And a small, treacherous part of me still remembered a little girl with pigtails who used to ask me to check under her bed for monsters. I answered. "This is a collect call from an inmate at the Pine County Jail," a robotic voice said. "To accept charges, press 1. I pressed 1. "Dad." It was Tasha. Her voice was small. It echoed. She was in a holding cell. I didn't say anything. I just breathed into the receiver. "Dad, please don't hang up," she said. "I know what happened at the house. I know what Carter said about the medical records." She paused. I heard her take a ragged breath. "He was right, Dad. I did have the surgery. 2 years ago. I didn't want kids with Blake. I didn't want to bring a baby into our mess." I waited. Why was she telling me this? "But Dad, that's not the whole truth," she continued. Her voice gained a sudden desperate energy. "The surgery? It failed. It happens. It's rare, but it happens. I found out 3 days ago. I took a home test. I am pregnant, Dad. I swear on Mom's grave. I lied at the house because I was scared Blake would find out. I didn't want him to know. I wanted to leave him. I wanted to take the baby and run. But now I'm here." She started to cry. It sounded real. "Dad, please. You can't let your grandchild be born in prison. The state will take it. They will put it in the system. You know what the system does to kids? You were adopted. You know." That hit a nerve. She knew exactly where to strike. She knew my history. She knew my deepest fear was abandonment. "I need bail, Dad," she pleaded. "Just bail me out. I will go to a doctor. I will prove it. If I'm lying, you can send me back. But if I'm telling the truth, can you live with yourself knowing you left us in here?" I held the phone tight. My knuckles turned white. It was a good story. It was plausible. Medical procedures failed. People kept secrets. And the idea of an innocent child, my blood growing up in a cell or a foster home, made my stomach turn. But I remembered the video. I remembered her face when she said I was worth more as a corpse. I remembered the signature on the death certificate. "How much is bail?" I asked. My voice was gravel. 50,000, she said quickly. Too quickly. She had already seen the judge. No, it was night. There was a schedule. She knew the standard schedule. "I will think about it," I said. "Dad, wait." I hung up. I sat in the kitchen. The silence was heavy. $50,000. The exact amount Ryan had handed Miller. The exact amount I had just given back to Emily. Was she lying? Probably. She was a pathological liar. But what if she wasn't? What if there was a child? I looked at the clock. It was 3:00 a.m. I couldn't call Carter. I couldn't call the doctor. I had to wait until morning. I stood up and walked to the ruined wall. I touched the cold steel of the safe. I had built this house to be strong. I had built it to last. But I had built it on the assumption that the people inside it would be decent. I was wrong about the people, but I was right about the steel. I grabbed a roll of duct tape from the drawer. I taped the photo of Tasha signing my death certificate to the refrigerator door. I wanted to see it. I wanted to remember. If she was pregnant, I would save the child, but I would burn the mother. I went to the garage. I grabbed a pry bar and a hammer. I had renovations to do. I started ripping the gold wallpaper off the walls. I tore it down in long, satisfying strips. I wanted to see the wood again, or what was left of it. I worked until dawn. I sweated. I bled when a staple caught my finger. I didn't care. I was reclaiming my territory. At 8:00 a.m. I showered. I put on a clean suit. I drank a cup of black coffee. Then I drove to the police station. I wasn't going there to pay bail. I was going there to find the truth. And if Tasha was lying to me again, if she was using an imaginary child as a shield, I was going to ensure she never saw the outside of a cell again. I walked into the station. The fluorescent lights hummed. The air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. "I am here to see Tasha Collier," I told the desk sergeant. He looked up. "You the father I am," I said. He nodded. "She's in interrogation room 2. She's been asking for you all night." I walked down the hallway. My boots echoed on the linoleum. I reached the door. I put my hand on the handle. This was the final test. I pushed the door open. Tasha sat at the metal table. She looked up. She smiled. It was a small, hopeful, manipulative smile. "Daddy," she said, "you came." I didn't smile back. "Stand up, Tasha," I said. "Let's go see the prison doctor." Her smile faltered. "Right now," I said. I was done with words. I wanted proof. I stood in the sterile hallway of the police station, the echo of Tasha's desperate plea still ringing in my ears. $50,000 bail. The exact sum of money Ryan had handed to the con man Miller. The exact sum I had given back to Emily to restart their lives. It was a symmetry that felt almost mocked by fate. Tasha, my daughter, sat in a holding cell claiming she carried the future of my bloodline, a grandchild, the one thing Esther and I had prayed for, the empty bedroom in the lake house we had never filled. I leaned against the cinder block wall. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted to believe her. If there was a child, everything changed. A child was innocent. A child did not forge signatures or hire arsonists. A child deserved a chance. If she was telling the truth, I would pay the bail. I would hire the best defense attorney money could buy. I would take custody. I would endure the presence of the woman who tried to kill me just to save the part of her that was pure. But I was an engineer. I did not build bridges on hope. I built them on data. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady, but my heart was a trip hammer against my ribs. I dialed Carter Banks. It was early, but Carter never slept when there was a crisis. "Desmond Shai," Carter answered on the first ring. "I assume you are calling about the arraignment." "I am calling about Tasha," I said. My voice sounded hollow in the empty corridor. "She claims she is pregnant. She claims she needs bail to protect the baby. She says the prison stress will cause a miscarriage." Carter was silent for a moment. I could hear the scratching of a pen on paper. "She is lying, Desmond," Carter said. His tone was dismissive. "It is a standard manipulation tactic. I have seen it a dozen times." "I need to know Carter," I snapped. "I need proof." "You have her power of attorney on file from the trust setup. It gave you access to her medical records for insurance purposes. Is it still active?" "It should be," Carter said. "She never revoked it. She probably forgot it existed." "Use it," I said. "Log into the health portal, call her OBGYN, do whatever you have to do. I need to know if she is pregnant. I need to know now. I will wait." "Give me 10 minutes, Carter said. I hung up. I stared at the door to the interrogation room. Through the small, reinforced window, I could see the back of Tasha's head. She was slumped over the metal table, her shoulders shaking. Was she crying for her unborn child? Or was she crying because she knew her gambit was a long shot? I paced. 10 minutes. 600 seconds. I counted the tiles on the floor. I watched a deputy lead a drunk man in handcuffs down the hall. I thought about the nursery Esther had designed. Yellow walls. A crib made of white oak. I had built that crib. It was sitting in the attic covered in a dust sheet, waiting. My phone buzzed. It had been 8 minutes. "Talk to me," I said. "I accessed her files from County General and her specialist in the city," Carter said. His voice was flat, stripped of all warmth. It was the voice of a man delivering a coroner's report. "Desmond, are you sitting down?" "Just tell me," I said. I braced myself against the wall. "Tasha is not pregnant," Carter said. "Her HCG levels from the intake exam this morning were 0, but that is not the smoking gun." "What is?" I asked. 2 years ago, Carter said, Tasha underwent a surgical procedure, a bilateral salpingectomy. She had her fallopian tubes removed, Desmond, not tied, removed. It was elective. She cited lifestyle preference on the intake forms. She sterilized herself. The phone felt heavy in my hand. The hallway seemed to tilt. Removed. Permanent. She had looked me in the eye. She had cried tears that looked like rain. She had invoked the memory of her dead mother. And she had known with absolute biological certainty that she was lying. She didn't just lie about a condition. She lied about the very possibility of life. She used the ghost of a grandchild to pick the lock of her prison cell. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "I am looking at the surgical report signed by Dr. Eris," Carter said. "There is no ambiguity. She cannot conceive. She lied to you, Desmond. She tried to scam you one last time." "Thank you, Carter," I said. "That is all I needed." I hung up. I stood there for a moment. I felt a sensation in my chest that I couldn't identify at first. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot. This was cold. It was the sensation of something dying. The last vestige of the father I used to be, the man who made excuses, the man who forgave, the man who hoped that man died in that hallway. He withered away and blew away like dust. I put the phone in my pocket. I straightened my jacket. I walked to the door of the interrogation room. I didn't knock. I pushed it open. Tasha looked up. Her eyes were red and puffy. She sniffled. She offered me a weak, trembling smile. "Did you do it, Daddy?" she asked. Her voice was a child's voice. "Did you pay the bail? Can we go?" I walked into the room. I didn't sit. I stood on the opposite side of the table, looking down at her. I placed my hands flat on the cold metal surface. "I spoke to Carter," I said. Tasha's smile faltered. A flicker of panic appeared in her eyes. "Carter, why you didn't need a lawyer for bail?" "I needed a lawyer to check your medical history," I said. Tasha went still. She stopped breathing. She stopped crying. She looked like a statue of guilt. "Dr. Eris," I said. 2 years ago. Bilateral salpingectomy." I watched the words hit her. It was like watching a building implode. The structural integrity of her lie failed instantly. Her face went slack. The color drained out of her cheeks. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You aren't pregnant, Tasha," I said softly. "You can never be pregnant. You made sure of that yourself." She stared at me. She didn't deny it. There was no point. The data was absolute. She stammered. "You just what?" I asked. "You just wanted to see if I was stupid enough to fall for it. You just wanted to twist the knife one more time." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded affidavit Blake had signed. I slammed it onto the table. "You aren't a mother," I said. "You aren't a victim. You are a predator. You looked at me, your own father, and you saw nothing but a bank account to be drained. You looked at your mother's memory and used it as a bargaining chip." I leaned in closer. My face was inches from hers. "You didn't just kill me on paper, Tasha. You didn't just smash my house. You just killed the last scrap of love I had left for you. You killed the father, and now you are going to deal with the witness." Tasha's face twisted. The fear vanished, replaced by a sudden ugly rage. The mask was gone. This was the real Tasha, the Tasha from the video. "You old bastard!" she screamed. She lunged across the table, her handcuffed hands clawing at me. "You have millions. You have millions sitting in a safe, and you let me live like this. You owe me. You owe me a life." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. "I owe you nothing," I said. "I gave you life. You chose to waste it." I turned my back on her. "Come back here," she shrieked. "Don't you walk away from me. I will rot in here. I will die in here." I walked to the door. Her screams echoed off the concrete walls. They were the sounds of a tantrum amplified by the acoustics of a cage. "I hope you do," I said to the empty hallway. I walked out of the room and let the heavy steel door slam shut behind me. The latch clicked. It was the sound of a book closing. I walked past the desk sergeant. He looked up, startled by the screaming coming from the back. "Is she okay?" he asked. "She is exactly where she belongs," I said. I walked out of the station and into the bright, blinding sunlight. I took a deep breath of clean air. I felt light. I felt empty. But for the first time in a year, I felt free. The anchor was cut. I got into my truck. I didn't look back at the jail. I put it in gear and drove toward the mountains. I had a house to fix, I had walls to rebuild, and I had a life to reclaim. The gavel came down with a sound that echoed like a final nail being driven into a coffin. I sat in the back row of the federal courtroom, my hands resting on my knees. I did not feel joy. I did not feel triumph. I felt the cold satisfaction of a structural equation balancing out to zero. The judge was a woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human greed. She did not waste words on Blake or Tasha. She treated them like what they were. Defective parts that needed to be removed from the machine of society. Blake stood first. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. The stress of the last 6 months had eaten him alive. He looked at me once before the sentencing, but he looked away quickly. He couldn't hold my gaze. The judge read the list of charges which had grown since the night at the lake house. The FBI had found a trail of wire fraud and identity theft stretching back 5 years. Blake wasn't just a bad son-in-law. He was a career criminal who had finally run out of runway. 15 years in federal prison, the judge said. No possibility of parole for 12. Blake slumped. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just accepted the weight of the stone wall he had built around himself. Then it was Tasha's turn. She stood up. She looked at the empty space where her lawyer stood. She looked at the gallery. She looked for a sympathetic face, but there were none. I was the only family she had, and I was the witness for the prosecution. 8 years, the judge said, for conspiracy, forgery, and elder abuse. Tasha gasped. She looked at me, her mouth opened to say something to plead one last time, but she stopped. She saw my face. She saw that the bank was closed. The emotional credit line had been revoked. The bailiff took her arm. She walked out of the courtroom without looking back. I walked out of the courthouse and into the afternoon sun. Carter Banks was waiting for me on the steps. He handed me a thick envelope. "It is done," Desmond Carter said. "The bonds have been liquidated." I took the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $3 million. It was a piece of paper that represented 40 years of my life and the reason my daughter had tried to kill me. It felt heavy. It felt cursed. I got into my truck and drove to the bank. I didn't deposit the money into my personal account. I split it. I put $1.5 million into a high-yield trust for my own care. I would never be a burden to anyone again. The other $1.5 million I transferred to a new account. I established the Esther Collier Legal Defense Fund. It was a nonprofit dedicated to providing top-tier legal representation for elderly victims of financial fraud. I wanted to make sure that the next time a son or daughter tried to steal a house, they would run into a wall of lawyers paid for by my money. I drove back to the lake house. The drive was quiet. The mountains were green. The air was clean. The next morning, the real work began. I didn't hire a fancy design firm. I hired a crew of local guys, carpenters, and drywallers who knew how to work with their hands. We walked into the living room. The gold wallpaper was peeling in the corners where I had started ripping it down. The scorch marks from the plasma cutter were still black on the floor. "Tear it down," I said to the foreman. "Get that paper off my walls." We spent 3 days stripping the vinyl. It came off in stubborn, sticky strips. The glue smelled like chemicals. Underneath the wood was waiting. My white oak. The wood I had milled myself. When the last of the paper was gone, the foreman called me over. He looked concerned. "Mr. Collier," he said, running his hand over the paneling. "This wood is in bad shape. Look at these gouges." I looked. The wood was scarred. There were deep dents where Blake had swung the sledgehammer. There were scratches from the pry bars. There were burn marks near the safe where the sparks from the plasma cutter had kissed the oak. It looked like a battlefield. "We can sand this down," the foreman suggested. "We can take 1/8 of an inch off. We can use wood filler. We can make it look new again, or we can rip it out and repanel." I touched the wood. I ran my finger into the deep indentation left by the sledgehammer. I felt the violence of that strike. I felt the history of it. "No," I said. The foreman looked confused. No to the sanding or no to the replacement, no to all of it, I said. I don't want you to hide the damage. I want you to clean it. I want you to seal it. I want you to put a clear satin varnish right over the scars. But Mr. Collier, the foreman, said, it will look damaged. It will look broken. I looked at him. It isn't broken, I said. It is still standing. I explained to him that a house is like a human being. If you erase the scars, you erase the story. Those marks on the wall were proof of what happened here. They were proof that greed attacked this house and the house won. I wanted to see those marks every time I sat in my armchair. I wanted to remember that survival isn't about being pristine. It is about enduring the impact and staying upright. We sealed the walls. The varnish brought out the grain of the oak, and it also darkened the scars, turning them into black streaks of character. The room looked tough. It looked weathered. It looked like me. 2 weeks later, a moving truck pulled into the driveway. It wasn't mine. It belonged to Ryan and Emily. I'd offered them the guest house. It was a small A-frame cabin I had built on the back of the property near the creek. It had been sitting empty for years, used only for storage. I told them they could rent it for the cost of utilities. I told them they could stay as long as they needed to save up for a new down payment on their own home. They got out of the truck. Emily was huge, pregnant now, her due date only weeks away. Ryan looked tired but happy. He walked over to me and shook my hand. Thank you, Desmond, he said. You don't know what this means to us. I waved him off. I need someone to keep the grass cut, I said gruffly. I am getting too old to mow the whole property myself. It was a lie. I could mow the property in my sleep, but I needed them there. I needed life. I had exorcised the ghosts of Tasha and Blake, but the silence they left behind was too loud. I needed the sound of footsteps. I needed the sound of the future. They moved in. I watched them from my kitchen window. I saw them putting up curtains. I saw them assembling the crib. The same crib that had sat in my attic gathering dust. I had given it to them. It was white oak. It was solid. It deserved to be used. A month later, on a Tuesday night, my phone rang. It was Ryan. It is time, he said. We are going to the hospital. I waited up. I sat in my living room surrounded by my scarred walls, and I waited. I thought about Tasha. I thought about the lie she told in the jail cell. I thought about the emptiness of that lie. At dawn, Ryan sent me a picture. It was a baby boy. His name was Leo. They came home 2 days later. I walked down to the guest house. Ryan opened the door. He looked exhausted. He looked terrified. He looked happier than any man I had ever seen. Come in, Desmond, he said. Come meet him. I walked into the small cabin. It smelled of baby powder and milk. Emily was sitting in the rocking chair. She smiled at me. Do you want to hold him? She asked. I hesitated. My hands were rough. They were scarred. They were hands that had built walls and racked shotguns. Wash your hands first, Emily said, laughing. I washed my hands. I scrubbed them until they were pink. I walked over to her. She placed the bundle in my arms. Leo was small. He was warm. He opened his eyes and looked at me. They were blue. They were brand new. I looked at this child. He did not share my DNA. He did not have my last name. He was not my blood. But as I held him, I felt the structural integrity of my heart reinforce itself. I realized that Tasha was wrong. Blood is just biology. It is just a sequence of proteins. Family is mechanics. Family is about who shows up. Family is about who holds the load when the beams start to buckle. Ryan and Emily were my family now. They had fought beside me. They had trusted me. And now they were letting me hold their most precious possession. I looked at Ryan. He is going to need a swing set, I said. Ryan smiled. I am not very good with tools, Desmond. I looked at the baby. I am, I said. I will teach you. I walked back to the main house later that evening. The sun was setting over the lake, turning the water into a sheet of hammered copper. I sat in my leather armchair, the one I had sat in when I confronted the thieves. I looked at the wall. I looked at the gouge from the sledgehammer. It was just a mark. It was just a memory. It didn't hurt anymore. I picked up my architectural pen. I opened my notebook. I started sketching. I calculated the load-bearing capacity for a swing set. I calculated the shear strength of the bolts. I designed a structure that would last for 20 years, a structure that would hold a child safely. I am Desmond Collier. I am 69 years old. I lost a daughter to greed. I lost a son-in-law to weakness. But I did not lose myself. I rebuilt. I reinforced. And I found that the new foundation was stronger than the old one ever was. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was waiting. And tomorrow I had work to do. I learned that life is much like the structures I used to build. Sometimes the people you believe are your load-bearing walls are actually the termites eating away at your foundation. Tasha and Blake taught me that blood is just biology, not loyalty. But Ryan, Emily, and little Leo taught me that it is never too late to pour a new foundation. We cannot control the storms that hit our house, but we can choose how we rebuild from the rubble. I chose not to cover up the scars on my walls because they are proof that I survived. They are proof that I am still standing. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe for more. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to find peace? I would love to hear your story. Until next time.